And we're back. It's week 8 of the 5280 Bums podcast. Charlie Nissen-Pickard here, as well as with Kaushik Kannan. How's it going, brother?
Going great, brother. Been a great week of football. I think a little bit more blowouts than usual, so we'll talk about that. But we still had our studs, and yeah, I think it was overall a pretty good week. Good week for our Broncos. Big game against the Cowboys. We'll talk about some of the guys there. Definitely some interesting divisional battles that we're seeing. So I think makes for some fun fall football. We'll see if it continues.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was exciting to see that some low-end teams that I've been really, really hard on this year also got some wins. So, and some players balled out for them. But let's get into it, my man.
Absolutely. All right. So I think we started with this in a previous podcast. So no surprises here. Winners list, number one guy. And I may have had something to do with this, Charlie. Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. We know my love for Jamar Chase. 12 receptions this week, 19 targets, 91 yards, did not have a touchdown, played against the Jets this week, had 21.1 PPR points. And I think the crazy thing here is none of us thought we'd be saying this, but Jamar Chase with another quarterback besides Joe Burrow and still putting up solid numbers weekly. I think one of the big shifts that we've seen with Jamar Chase is that he's become much more of a PPR merchant, as they say, a lot more receptions, just a lot more underneath targets going to him versus those deeper bombs that Joe Burrow would throw, where he was maybe a bit more on the efficiency side of things. Like maybe he had 7 or 8 receptions in the past, but he'd go for over 100 yards because many of them were deep. But now they're finding him underneath. They're exploiting this zone defense. They continue to feed Jamar Chase the ball, even when defenses know that he's coming. And, great matchup this week for him against the Jets. Joe Flacco continues to look for him. So definitely some encouraging involvement. Unfortunately, the Bengals couldn't get over the top. They couldn't get the victory this week, but still a solid effort from him, and I expect this to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame anything on the offense right there or Joe Flacco. Jamar did his part, and as you mentioned, kind of has trended toward becoming that target merchant. I think it's more due to just the lack of reps and game film for Joe Flacco to kind of process, get into that system and integrate. I mean, he's only been there for a week and a half. So there's not really much he can do, but still an insane game. I mean, you get 12 receptions any week of the season. That's really, really great. On 19 targets, it shows that he's only going to get that many every single week, probably in that 15 range for him. It reminds me a lot of what the Saints had with Michael Thomas at the end of Drew Brees' career. So you mentioned those kind of underneath routes, lots of slants, the curl routes to the outside of the boundary. So if you're a fantasy owner and you have this guy, be thankful, be happy, because anything is better than what we watched with the Jake Browning show for those first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And with Joe Flacco, as long as he stays healthy, I only see Jamar Chase staying in that 18 to 20 point range as kind of a floor for him.
Absolutely. All right. So next guy we're going to go to had kind of a bounce back week, Charlie. Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. And I don't think any of us saw Tua Tagovailoa having the game that he did in Atlanta against a surging Falcons team. But Jalen Waddle, 5 receptions on 6 targets, 99 yards, had a big touchdown late in that game. Off a Bijan Robinson fumble, I believe, had a total of 20.9 PPR points. And as I mentioned, I think this is a bounce back effort for Jalen Waddle. Started to see the kind of explosive play that we've been looking for, or that we look for weekly from a guy like a Jalen Waddle, who has that game-breaking speed, especially deep or especially after the catch. We used to see this for years with him and Tyreek Hill, just running all over the field and getting that yards after catch. After every play. And so it was great to see him on that quick in route, catch that ball and go all the way to the house and score. And I think that kind of started to put the game away from Miami. I think the Falcons had a tough time recovering after that score. So definitely a great effort from Jalen Waddle. Not huge in terms of targets, but not a huge concern for me. Again, we've talked about the Dolphins, not the best team at all in football, right? Long way to go for them. Lots of potential coaching changes, maybe in the offseason. But good to see them at least play some good ball this week. Let's see if this continues for Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I don't think he was ever a really high target kind of recipient in the past. That was always Tyreek Hill. He was known for having those deep catches in that 6 to 8 target range, get his 85 yards or so. So I think to see that he's still producing while not having the true wide receiver one in that system with all the turmoil that's going on. A-Chain is been kind of the focal point of that offense this entire season. The running game hasn't been an issue at all. The passing game has been inconsistent, due mostly just to the Tua Tagovailoa show that is, and the up and downs that he brings week in, week out. But I think what's great for him and fantasy owners anywhere is with the trade deadline approaching, and I think it's actually next Tuesday when that happens, he could be potentially a trade candidate if Miami wants to get something out of him, which could land him in a better system. I mean, Houston's in need of wide receivers right now with Nico Collins' injury looming, and there are some other teams that might, fancy him, and which could exploit and potentially bring out even more potential in that offense and his ability to produce week to week. So keep an eye out for him, and I'm happy for the Dolphins, man. They got picked up their second win of the season against the tough Falcons team.
Yeah, definitely. And, one other team I'll mention for our Denver viewers, Denver Broncos, man. Like, they've got some inexperience behind Cortland Sutton in that wide receiver room. Would love to see them go and swing a deal for a wide receiver. They've been playing really well the past few games. And so it'll be interesting what happens by the trade deadline. But correctly noted there, Charlie. I think Jalen Waddle, definitely one of those candidates. Chris Olave has been in some of those discussions as well. Last reports, it seems like the Saints may not move him by the deadline, but definitely could be some interesting names on the move as we get closer to that trade deadline. So something to watch. All right, so next guy we've got actually in the AFC West. So speaking of the Broncos, one of the AFC West competitors to the Broncos is Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. Had 6 receptions on 10 targets, 88 yards and a touchdown, a total of 20.8 PPR points this week. And, Charlie, we talked about Ladd McConkey in past weeks as maybe losing out on that WR1 kind of target share that we expected at the beginning of the season when we drafted Ladd McConkey. I don't think he went later than like the 3rd round in many drafts. Sometimes he was even being picked up in the 2nd round, just given the upside in that offense, and Justin Herbert, and really being the guy on that team. And I think this week was a big step in that direction. And he's been trending up, especially the past couple of weeks. But as we know with fantasy, and as we know with positions like the wide receiver room, especially with the deep room like the Los Angeles Chargers with Quentin Johnston and Keenan Allen as well. I think this was a great effort from Ladd McConkey, the 10 targets, especially in that offense. We've seen Gadsden, the tight end, has also been doing amazing. And so lots of mouths to feed. Ladd McConkey now starting to turn it on for that stretch run. Chargers, prolific offense, put up a ton of points against a tough Vikings defense at home. So I think these kind of efforts are what we expected from Ladd McConkey. And I see him staying in this kind of fringe WR1 conversation as we approach the midpoint of the season.
Yeah, I'm really excited for him. I mean, he kind of started out slow. His targets were incredibly low. And I think after the rookie breakout season that he had last year, a lot of people were kind of wondering, is this something that's happening with the system as a whole? Is it internally? Or is it just more that like QJ was breaking out as well as he was? And so is he just like assuming that spot when they drafted him so high a few years ago that this guy is, his time is now? But it looks like with the QJ injury, Keenan kind of slowing down, Keenan more of kind of that boomer bust candidate week in, week out. It looks like Ladd is rightfully taking back over and showing that he is the true wide receiver one on that team. As you mentioned, 6 receptions on those 10 targets, had a solid week with the 20.8 points. The running back room remains a carousel. Vidal's had some solid games 2 out of these last 3 weeks, which is huge. And I think with the emergence of Gadsden, it kind of bodes well for Ladd McConkey as well. I know that they're going to have to share targets per se, but that is a passing offense, and it's trended that way this entire season after primarily being in the rushing attack. And I think it's just more force of them having to adapt on the fly with, as I mentioned, the running back room being the kind of revolving door that it is. But owners have to be excited, man. I mean, Ladd is breaking out in year 2 again, and I think moving forward, he's going to be a guy that's going to get you 15 points as his floor every single week, and 20 points is very attainable for him in that high-powered offense.
Absolutely. Fun player to watch, and good to see him get back on track. Another guy that's a fun player to watch this season, and I think you guys got him for a great value if you got him in drafts, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. Played against the Titans this week, had 8 receptions on 9 targets, 95 yards and a touchdown, a total of 23.5 PPR fantasy points. Michael Pittman just continues to ball, Charlie, and I think this is part of this resurgent Colts team. None of us really expected Daniel Jones to have this kind of resurgence with the Colts, but the Colts are playing Colts football. They're running the ball with Jonathan Taylor. He's getting his fill of carries, getting his fill of touchdowns. We'll touch on that here in a bit. But Daniel Jones has been playing at a very high level, playing pretty flawless football, if you ask me. I know there's been some turnovers here and there, but with an offense like the Colts that is putting the ball in Daniel Jones's hands when those crunch situations approach, when they can't run the ball with Jonathan Taylor, I think that's to be expected. But Michael Pittman just continues to do what Michael Pittman does. He's finding those underneath routes. He's getting some occasional explosive plays, but he's really using that tall vertical frame to go up and high point the football when he can. He's scoring touchdowns. This is exactly the kind of guy that we drafted, maybe even in the 7th, 8th, 9th round this year, expecting this kind of upside. And so it's great to see him continue to deliver. I don't really see things changing in this offense. It seems like he's got the clear alpha role. I know he's got some competition from Ashton Pierce and maybe a little bit from Tyler Warren as well, but I don't think that's really going to affect Pittman's floor. He's a very safe WR2 start almost every week this year.
Oh, definitely. And I don't think it affects him either. Alec Pierce isn't really the guy that's the go-to over there, especially, Joshua Downs, same thing. And Tyler Warren, as he is one of the best young tight ends in this league, he's still a rookie, and I think they're going to go to their first surefire guns. And that's where Pittman comes in. I mean, they have a high-powered attack, a true, complementary offense. They're 5th in the NFL in passing yards per game with 250 on average. So, I mean, he's going to get his. And if you see that, if he's getting 80, 90 yards per week, he's averaging about a third of that offense's passing yards, which bodes well for him, especially if he's not racking up those touchdowns. If you're playing in those full PPR leagues and he's getting 8 receptions on these 10, 12 targets, that's going to go well as having a high floor for this type of player. And the big and most important thing for him is Daniel Jones hasn't actually been turning the ball over at all. He's been really, really safe and efficient in that offense. So the offense and Steichen hasn't been afraid to continue to pass the ball, even when up big. And I mean, and they've been blowing people out. So there is some concern with that, especially in the second half of games. If you're, really, really needing some big points, that they're going to go to that rushing attack. But I mean, when you're getting a team that's putting up 30 to 35 points every single week, Michael Pittman is almost assuredly going to be involved and at some point in that offense. And I mean, you got to be happy for these guys. Nobody would have ever predicted that the Colts be this good. And I think it's a product of just everybody buying in. They have an elite offensive line. They have Jonathan Taylor. And as you mentioned, we're going to talk about him in a short bit. He would be my pick for MVP if the NFL recognized your boy CNP to, have that much power and sway. But overall, man, I just, this team is scary. On paper, I think the Colts are the best team in the NFL right now. And I'm not afraid to say that as a Packers fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we've seen this week over week, I would say our Broncos are making a push for that, maybe the Patriots as well, but I know the Broncos had a tough loss to the Colts in their building. It'll be an interesting, AFC race this year. It looks like a lot of teams are emerging that we didn't expect. And so that's been really fun to watch. Michael Pittman, I think he's going to have better days ahead. Great player, great team, great situation. And, he continues to deliver. All right, next guy on our list is Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 88 yards and a touchdown, total of 20.8 PPR points. And this was I think, pretty solid matchup for the Buffalo Bills, right? Kind of a get-right game after a pretty emotional loss to the Falcons past week. Go into Carolina. Carolina's been surging a little bit as well. Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard, that two-man group, the two-man game in the running game. Andy Dalton, we know Andy Dalton can ball, right? He's been a journeyman quarterback, but he can get after it, throw the football. We saw Ted McMillan had a pretty decent game as well. But Khalil Shakir, man, he's a guy, that is kind of that go-to guy for Josh Allen, if you will, in the passing game. I know Josh Allen likes to use the tight ends quite a bit, Kincaid and Knox in particular. But, outside of James Cook and that running game and Josh Allen, I think Khalil Shakir is the go-to guy, and he proved it this week. Had 7 targets, pretty healthy volume, had a touchdown, had a couple of explosive plays, I believe, in this game as well. I think great volume for him. The question here, Charlie, will be, can he continue this on a week-to-week basis? My guess is going to be no, just based on how good that Bills team is and how concentrated they are in terms of targets, as well as just overall opportunities. And most of those opportunities are going to Josh Allen and James Cook. But if this is a guy that you could go out and get on waivers and just stash him for the right matchup, I think that's a great ad. And he could easily have that high weekly ceiling of 20, 25 points as we saw this week.
Yeah, I definitely think the ceiling is incredibly high when the passing offense is, in sync right there. but I think the floor is really, really low, and that's kind of the big issue with the team as a whole. And it's not that the offense isn't great because we know how good Josh Allen is. We know how high power they can be when they're locked in. I just think that they're going to focus more on James Cook, and we're going to talk about him as well in our next section. And the problem is around the goal line too. Josh Allen is such a great runner that I think he just moved into second all time in rushing touchdowns behind Cam Newton for the NFL all time history. So the ceiling is nice for him, but the floor is really, really low. So great week for him. Super happy for him. But as we saw with Keon Coleman in those first 2 weeks, it's very, very tough to bet on these consistency from these wide receivers from the Bills. And speaking of consistency, the next guy you're going to talk about is kind of in that same boat.
Yeah, you read my mind, Charlie. I was going to say the same thing. So Troy Franklin is our next guy of the Denver Broncos. Had 6 receptions on 8 targets, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. It's a very exciting game for him. 26.9 PPR fantasy points. First things first, we got to, give our boy Troy Franklin some credit. I think this is second or third 20-point game of the season. Has been unbelievable fine for the Broncos. Another story where a quarterback reunites with the guy that he went to college with. We've seen, some instances of that happening. The famous one being Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. This is one with Troy Franklin. I think they got him in the later rounds of the draft, but I think Bo Nix definitely put a good word in for him. This has been a guy that has played with Bo Nix since his Oregon days. They're very close. They had a pretty close friendship at Oregon, played really well together, and he was an explosive guy. And I think he's turned into that burner in this offense. And I think that was something that was surprising for me, Charlie, especially given we've got a guy like a Marvin Mims on this team. But Troy Franklin is now seeming to be that clear number 2 option, it feels, in this offense. I know Pat Bryant had a pretty impressive touchdown catch as well. But behind Courtland Sutton, if Courtland Sutton is getting doubled, Troy Franklin seems like the guy who can get the job done. As you mentioned, Charlie, I think the ceiling is very, very high, as we've seen on the weeks where Troy Franklin has popped off. And I think the defense did him some favors as well. The Cowboys have one of the worst pass defenses in the game. But at the same time, the floor can be concerning, right? And they're going up against a pretty tough Houston defense this next week in Houston. So we'll see if he can keep it up and stay consistent. But I think there's going to be more of these days ahead for Troy Franklin. This offense, I think, has outperformed our expectations. They're starting to find that deep passing game as well, especially now that they're getting the running game going. So I think there's going to be more opportunities ahead for Troy Franklin.
Yeah, definitely. And to touch on what you said at the start of kind of his player profile, this is his second time having over 20 points in fantasy this entire year. He's had 3 double-digit games. So great for him. I think Sleeper has him ranked at number 23rd overall in full PPR leagues for wide receivers. So incredibly solid for a guy who's, in his second year with this team and second year with Bo Nix. And dude, I mean, you mentioned on it, the passing game is evolving right in front of our eyes. They're getting better week in, week out. There's a lot more trust there. It looked like the first 4 or 5 weeks they were sputtering. J.K. Dobbins was kind of leading the charge. In these last 2 or 3 weeks, they've kind of woken up. Especially we talked about it last week. That fourth quarter comeback, 33 points in the fourth quarter. You don't do that by just rushing the football. You have to pass when you're down 19. It's obvious passing down situations the entire time. You're almost playing in that 2-minute offense, trying to speed it up to get as many plays in as possible, to get as many possessions in as possible. And I mean, an efficient week for him, man. 89 yards, 2 tutties to go with, along with that, the 26.9 fantasy points. I don't expect that going every single week, just kind of like what we talked about with Khalil Shakir. But there is potential in this offense, man. We saw RJ Harvey getting involved in the passing attack as well, getting some touchdowns. When they're locked in, they're really, really high powered. It looks like Sean Payton and Bo Nix have kind of rightfully got the ship in track and in line. And the Texans are weak, or they're not weak defensively. They are strong. I mean, Derek Stingley is one of the best secondary players in the NFL. But I think if he's going to be on Sutton, there's going to be opportunities for Franklin to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a fun game. We'll touch up on that here in a bit, but definitely, I think some good days ahead for Troy Franklin. Good to see the Broncos thriving. All right, we're going to go to the next segment here, which is our running back winners. First guy here is Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Had 18 carries for 133 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Had 2 receptions on 3 targets for 14 yards, and then had 1 completion on 1 attempt for 4 yards, and a very critical touchdown pass to Mason Taylor late in that game to put the Jets ahead. And that touchdown ended up getting the Jets their first win of the season, had a total of 33.86 PPR points. And I think this was a coming out party for Brees Hall. Did absolutely everything right in this game, everything from running the ball, catching the ball, throwing the ball. I mean, what more could this guy have done? This is a plus matchup for him. I think he started a little bit slow, and there was some concerns there with Justin Fields again playing, and we know Fields has had his struggles. But I think this Jets team started to find their momentum late in that game. Brees Hall with a beautiful move down the sideline and just keeping his feet in bounds and getting in the end zone for that second touchdown. And then throwing basically a trust ball to Mason Taylor. He pump fake, kind of held the ball back for a moment, and then threw it to his guy, kind of like a quarterback would, give his guy a chance when the DB has him completely wrapped up, and found Mason Taylor for that game-winning touchdown. So what a great story for Brees Hall. Gets in the end zone. I think touchdown regression had been a little bit of a question for him in the past. He was getting the yards, he was getting the involvement. The Jets weren't really in a favorable game script to keep leaning on him in the running game, and Isaiah Davis was getting a lot of those third down reps. But I think this was the week that we wanted for Brees Hall, and hopefully he can stick to this. He's the clear RB1 in this offense. Hopefully Tanner Engstrand and this New York Jets team can start, building on this a little bit. This was a Bengals team that was expected clearly to win this game. This is a big letdown for them. But Brees Hall was a big part of that. I think he's going to remain in those RB1 ranks moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what they kind of do with the offense moving forward. Everybody was the main focal point going into this week was like everybody. I think a lot of people saw the story with Justin Fields. He was very honest with kind of what was happening within the mental state of the game, and I think that's incredibly admirable. I wish more players were willing and open to doing that type of stuff because we know it's not easy. The constant pressure. We talked about it last week. What Woody Johnson had kind of said when asked about him in an interview, which I wasn't a fan of because I just think you should never throw your players underneath the bus. But Brees Hall, man, absolute stud. He's kind of gone through a lot of adversity. Just his entire playing career, suffered a really crucial injury, or gruesome injury, I should say, to come out 18 carries, 133 yards, the tutties. You mentioned the late, what are you going to call it? Just like dump off to Taylor, who's another rookie, showing some action. So very, very happy for them, man. They were down big in that game, and they come roaring all the way back, dude. They put up a 39 spot. Shows, dude. And I don't think the offense had looked that good since week 1 versus the Steelers. So really, really happy for them. And hopefully Brees can keep it up because he's definitely one of my favorite players in fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned it, right? That first week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, they lost a close game. I think they lost by a point. So now playing another AFC North opponent, winning by a point, I think we're, at equilibrium now, right? They lost by 1, they won by 1, so all good. But yeah, I think some good days ahead for Brees Hall. Great win for the Jets this week. All right, next guy staying in the AFC East is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. Had 19 carries for 216 yards and 2 touchdowns, had 33.6 PPR fantasy points. And, I think this is, again, kind of like a bounce back week for James Cook. He'd had a couple games, actually, of just single-digit fantasy points past few games. I think part of it was just how he was being used in that Falcons game, wasn't getting the goal line touches. Ray Davis had that pass reception out of the backfield and got in the end zone. I think the previous game also some issues just with goal line usage, just overall usage in the game, even when he was playing very well. So James Cook, we know he can be an explosive guy. We were reminded of that this week. 216 yards, unbelievable game on the ground. And I think the crazy thing, Charlie, here is this guy is not even the preferred goal line option, right? You've got a big quarterback that's taking a hell of a lot of quarterback sneaks. You've got Ray Davis that'll sometimes get in there on the goal line. And then James Cook, in some cases, is maybe that third option if they even give him the ball at the goal line, if Josh Allen isn't scoring. And so, it's great to see this guy continue to produce like this. He relies on those explosive plays, but those explosive plays come for a guy like James Cook, who gets those yards every time he runs the ball. I think he's, many of his runs, he's going for 5, 10, 15 yards, it seems like routinely. And I think this is going to continue. This guy is a clear RB1. I think the buy window on him is completely slammed shut. I know we mentioned him in buy conversations in the past, but this is the guy that you're keeping on your roster, and I think he's going to continue to rock in those RB1 ranks.
Yeah, nobody in their sane mind would be willing to trade him at this moment unless you were getting like a 2-for-1, and that's like a Jamar Chase level type player, which those guys don't grow on trees at all. And as you mentioned, it is kind of the touchdown dependency is very low for him. It's not really fair to him because I think he should be one of those guys where he's getting you down to that first and 5-6 yard line. Feed in the rock, man. Give this guy what he deserves. I know you got a big 6'5" QB who's 240 pounds who can score on almost anybody because he's built like a linebacker. But I just think it's unfair to James Cook, and that's just me being selfish and not there in the system and huddle at all. But dude, when you average over 10 yards per carry against not like an insanely good Carolina Panthers defense, but one that's it's a competent defense. It's definitely not on the level of the Cowboys or the level of the Dolphins where they're just horrendous and they're allowing everybody to run all over them for 150 yards every single week. We watched what the Panthers did a couple of weeks ago to the Cowboys where they kind of just stiffened up on their defense, and the Cowboys have a really high-powered offense, so they've shown the ability to be a bend-don't-break defense. But this week, the floodgates opened entirely, and that game was over by midway through the second quarter, an absolute blowout. I'm really, really happy for him. I mean, the guy led the league in touchdowns last year. I think he had around 18 touchdowns, or he's tied for the league, I should say. So not as high right now. I think Jonathan Taylor's leading that for at least running backs. But, dude, awesome week for him. Anybody that puts up 33 points as a big winner in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Jonathan Taylor, let's talk about Jonathan Taylor next. Indianapolis Colts had 12 carries for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns this week. What a special game. I believe he had some pass catching involvement as well. 37.4 PPR fantasy points. Unbelievable game for Jonathan Taylor. I think he added speaking of the pass catching, I think he added another touchdown through the air. So Charlie, maybe grab the receiving numbers for us, but 37.4 PPR fantasy points, unbelievable game for him against the Titans. I think this is his third game now with 3 touchdowns this year. He makes it seem routine, Charlie. I think this guy, he's constantly in the end zone. It seems like he's doing his little skip dance all the time into the end zone where he's on one leg. And what a special player this guy is. We've talked about what a great value he's been in drafts this year. Cool. Yeah, he's got 2 targets, 21 yards and a touchdown. Continues to see some pass catching involvement as well. This guy's been an absolute gem this year. Continues to deliver week in and week out. And especially for any of us that got Jamar Chase in the first round and got a guy like Jonathan Taylor in the second round, I think you guys are all sitting pretty. You probably haven't lost this year because those guys together the past few weeks are putting up 50, 60 points. And even before Jamar Chase's little breakout moment, Jonathan Taylor was regularly delivering like 20, 30 fantasy points a week. And so this guy's an absolute machine. We've said it. We continue to say it on the show. The Colts will really go as far as he does. He's a big part of what they do and a big part of just their overall offensive philosophy. And it's crazy how fast this guy is as well. He's a little bit older than some of the other backs. We've talked about the shelf life. Jonathan Taylor has been a guy they've really used in that workhorse role. And, it's just unbelievable to see this guy healthy. He's running full speed. He's running full steam. And it seems like continues to get better week by week, Charlie. And so this has been a really special player this year, has been awesome for fantasy teams. And I don't see anything changing for him moving forward.
MVP. That's all I'm going to say, man. MVP. Best player in the NFL right now. I know it's a QB award. It disgusts me. It's similar to the Heisman Award in college football. I think they really need to rewrite it. And he's going to most likely win Offensive Player of the Year barring any injury. But, dude, this guy's a stud. We've talked about it multiple times. The Colts will go as far as he takes them. To have a game like this, 12 carries, 153 yards, to be an all-purpose running back like this, where he's affecting all assets or all facets of the game, just a special, special player, especially a guy who had kind of been banged up before last year, where he was missing 4 or 5 games a season. Now he's getting healthy. Didn't really have a lot of QB consistency. Did have a few years. I mean, they had Phillip Rivers there one year. They were decently solid. Then the whole AR debacle. He had every right to go and say, hey, give me a trade, dude. He wasn't a full fan with Irsay. I know there was a lot of people that weren't, they weren't a big Irsay truthers in that kind of front office and in that coaching system, and as well as the players in the locker room. Had every right to ask out, but he sticks it out, dude, and now he's balling out. His team looks legit. We just talked about it earlier with the Michael Pittman. He kind of comes in and 37.4 fantasy points. He's the number 1 running back in football right now, whether you're playing half PPR or full PPR, and super excited for him, and hopefully he can stay healthy and the Colts can keep riding on. And, the next guy we've been really, really hard on, but he kind of finally had a breakout game as well, Kaushik.
Yeah, and that's Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals, Charlie. Had 12 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. Also had 3 receptions on 3 targets for 32 yards and a touchdown. 25.5 PPR fantasy points. And again, Chase Brown is one of those guys that we drafted early in drafts, probably second round, third round, for maybe that RB2 slot, right? And we know that when Joe Burrow is in there, Chase Brown has tremendous upside. He's going to be the pass catching machine for all those check down passes. He's going to score touchdowns because Joe Burrow is such a great passer, demands respect. Safeties can't come down in the box because the second they do, he's throwing it deep to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And so, Chase Brown has been a special player the past few years. I think many of us expected him to do more than he has to this point in the year. Part of that has been just the inefficient run game and also just the bad offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think this is a great get right game for him. This was a good matchup at home against the Jets. Has a pass receiving touchdown as well as a rushing touchdown. And Chase Brown is one of those guys. He's a hybrid player. He's a guy that gets it done on the ground and in the air. And this is the kind of involvement we wanted to see from him. 3 receptions is a little bit light, but we have seen those rushing numbers get better over the past few weeks. Over 6 yards per carry this week, scores a touchdown as well. And I think Joe Flacco has really been a boon for this entire team. All boats have risen. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown now. I expect this to continue. I think Chase Brown's going to be in the RB2 conversation, especially now that the Bengals kind of feels like need to win out. And we say this every year with that team. It feels like they need to win out. They need to do something special. Chase Brown's going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, a back-breaking loss this week, man, speaking on winning out. It's just an awful back-breaking loss. I know, shout out to the Jets getting their first win of the season. But this, with the Steelers ended up losing. I know they're playing on Sunday night, so they had no way to predict that. But Ravens struggling. They did get a big win versus the Bears. But Browns being non-existent. A win this week, dude, they would have been right there in conversation. You're a game and a half back in the NFC or the AFC North. Joe Flacco or Joe Burrow is probably back. What was it projected? Like starting like first or second week of December to just stay afloat, man. They could have been there. They're not completely out of the race. But like you said, dude, Joe Flacco has kind of opened up this entire offense for them. Everybody's clicking right now. I expect them to continuously only get better week to week. Joe Flacco is not turning the ball over a lot. He brings a lot of veteran leadership and presence. He's not going to move the pocket at all. Chase Brown's going to be there. I expect the receptions to go up for him. I mean, you're still getting over 10 yards of reception, which mostly is going to be catching out of the flat. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing most of those are yards after catch because Chase Brown has shown that he's shifty when he gets into the open field and can make defenders miss. But I mean, like you said, 6 yards a carry, that's solid, dude. That's not realistic every single week, but if you can stay in that 4 to 4.5 yard range, then you're going to be in a good boat. This is going to help with the system overall. And I mean, dude, 25.5 fantasy points, gotta love it. And if people were able to buy low on him early on in that season, those first, right after Burrow got injured in those weeks 2 through 5, they got to be feeling really, really good with themselves right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, this could be the kind of Chase Brown performance that we see week to week. Obviously, maybe a little bit more matchup dependent than other RB2s out there, but still a pretty solid player. And I think he's going to continue to produce. And speaking of producing, Charlie, this is one of your guys. I know you have him in our league. Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles is our last running back. We've got 14 carries for 150 yards, a touchdown. Had 4 receptions on 5 targets for 24 yards and another touchdown. Total of 34.4 PPR points against his former team, the Giants, at home, in a game that I think some of us circled, maybe unexpectedly, just given how good the Giants played in the Meadowlands in East Rutherford a couple weeks ago, beating the Eagles in their building. And so, now we go to Philadelphia. We think, hey, do the Eagles maybe have some of that emotion lingering? Are they vulnerable at home? Eagles immediately give the ball to Saquon, get back to business. He's got that long touchdown early in the game, had several long runs, it feels like, throughout this game. And this was a huge get-right game for him. He had been kind of low on fantasy points the past couple of weeks. I think he was in the single digits. And some people were saying, hey, should I sell Saquon? What's going on with him? The Eagles have abandoned the running game because A.J. Brown was getting all these targets. Devontae Smith was getting all these targets, especially in the Vikings game. And so good to see Saquon get back on track. Looks like he left the game late. Hopefully it's not a lingering injury. Looks like he is questionable at the moment, but still a great game for him. This is the kind of Saquon Barkley we know and love, and hopefully he can stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really happy for him. He left in the third quarter. I think it was like a groin issue, maybe a hamstring, some lower leg issue or some leg issue, but it didn't look too serious. They went and interviewed him after the game, and he was kind of all smiles. So I would say it was more precautionary. The game was kind of out of reach by that point in the third quarter when he did get taken out. But this has got to feel good. This is like having a weight lifted off your shoulders, man. This is accomplishing a big task. We saw that the passing offense kind of broke through last week and the week prior, so that's trending in the right direction. But to have 14 carries, man, 150 yards, dude, a tutty, and then also have another touchdown within the receiving category, that's going to be just really, really good for all Saquon owners, especially myself, even though my team is absolutely in the bottom of the pile, and I'm being really, really nice and calm about it right now. But I'm excited for him, man. This guy struggled all year. A lot of people took him in that RB1 range after last season, showing that he broke Barry Sanders' all-purpose yard record or yards from scrimmage. There was kind of going to be he was bound to have some regression. That's just like expected from any running back, especially from a guy who is older in age for running back years and standards, has had a major injury in the past, did have, I think, over 450 carries last year, which is just a crazy high amount. You don't see that from many guys in this modern era of football. But I think if he can stay healthy and get right, I think what you're going to see too is Tank Bigsby looks good. In those limited reps he had, I think he had 10 carries for like 108 yards and like a half of football. So if they can kind of mix that in, maybe throw Saquon in more of those short yardage passing downs, get him involved in that, this is going to bode well for him because he's not going to get as many tackles throughout early in the game. He's going to stay fresher, stay healthier, and later on, and then when you get to the playoff rounds of the season, he's going to boom and break out for you, dude. So really, really happy for him.
Yeah, no, great bounce back for him. With that, we're going to go to our loser section. So wide receivers are going to be first. And the first guy we've got here is Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons, played against the Dolphins this week. Had 1 reception on 4 targets for 11 yards, 2.1 PPR fantasy points. Charlie's shaking his head. Why the heck is Darnell Mooney on this list? Usually we talk about Drake London. Well, the big news this week was that Drake London was held out of this game with an injury. And so Darnell Mooney was really the next man up, and the next man up being WR1 of the Falcons. And so this was a game against a terrible Miami Dolphins team. We've talked about this team several times on this podcast, have not been playing well, and a game at home that the Falcons should have had, right? This was a way easier win than playing the Buffalo Bills at home. And to see Darnell Mooney go out here and only have 1 reception on 4 targets with the number 1 wide receiver out, not a great game. Maybe points to some regression as well. I know Darnell Mooney has had some concerns this season with injury, has been in and out of the lineup. So maybe not that dependable WR2 option that many of us thought he would be. So yeah, disappointing game for him in a favorable situation. And that's why he's on our losers list this week. And I don't know if I see things changing. Drake London could be making his way back soon. And, the Falcons do need to win games, but I don't know if Darnell Mooney will be a huge part of that equation.
Yeah, I was shaking my head because it's just incredibly disappointing, man. You should be getting most of the targets in this offense with Drake London out. We've seen Drake London get 10, 12 targets. He hasn't been really, really efficient, usually in that 4 to 6 reception range. However, dude, you're not competing with anybody with this offense. I mean, Kyle Pitts is there, yes. Bijan has shown that he has some pass catching ability, but neither of those guys are going to be along the boundary. They're not going to be as flexible within that system that Darnell Mooney is. And for you to pretty much have what I would consider a no-show game when you're the wide receiver 1 on your team and it's a blowout loss, like that's just it's not acceptable, man. And Bijan didn't have a great week by his standards either. So somebody has to step up. I will say playing with Kirk, because I think Kirk Cousins did get some action in that game and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. So playing with Kirk Cousins can't be easy because there's going to be the timing's going to be off. He is, he's shaking off some rust, might be seeing some ghosts because he hasn't gotten any game time this year. But overall, dude, just disappointing from him. And not only is a loser to me, somebody I would just consider not even having on your roster if you have the wide receiver depth.
Yeah. I think this guy could easily be a drop. Maybe a guy that you added this week, just given the amount of people that were on bye. But yeah, I don't think Darnell Mooney is going to be a big factor on any fantasy teams moving forward. And speaking of a guy who's been a non-factor, Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers is our next guy. Had a goose egg, Charlie, good old goose egg. 0 targets, 0 receptions, had 0 points. And the big note here, he played 52% of the snaps. So he's playing over half the team snaps. And he's playing again in a pretty good matchup, I would say, at home against the Minnesota Vikings, who gave up a ton of yards to both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Gave up several touchdowns in that game. I think 3 total touchdowns to those guys. We know the caliber of those guys, but Quentin Johnston, the way he's been playing this season, has been playing very well. But I think, again, we're starting to see maybe that volatility in this Chargers passing game week to week. We've seen Gadsden really step up as the tight end. We've now seen McConkey show up, and that's been at Keenan Allen and now Quentin Johnston's expense. And so this has been kind of a very interesting passing offense in the sense that we don't know who to trust week to week necessarily. It seems like now the baton's been passed on to Ladd McConkey and Aronde Gadsden. It remains to be seen if Quentin Johnston will continue to factor in the plans. He's been more of that deep threat, I think. And so I think the big thing here, let's hope he stays healthy. Let's hope that, they continue to find more ways to maybe push the ball down the field. Maybe he should see more opportunities, but definitely not a good game for him, having the good old goose egg in this game.
Yeah, incredibly disappointed, especially when they did so well offensively this week. Mentioned versus the Vikings, who struggled defensively, which has kind of been a surprise. It's been their bread and butter this season with the inept offense on the other side of the ball. But dude, this is I just looked it up. So since 2023, he's only had one game where he recorded 0 points in fantasy, and that was week 4 versus Dallas. So I don't expect it to be every single week. Not like, no offense, Darnell Mooney, where, he's not kind of a targeted focal point in the offense. But this guy showed, dude, he was balling out those first 3 or 4 weeks. He was top 4 wide receiver in full PPR formats, especially under sleeper if you had that's just standard full PPR scoring system. But to play 52% of the snaps, I can understand maybe not getting a reception because that just happens. Some guys, they're getting blanketed by coverages. Maybe they're slipping down on some bad turf or bad field. But to have 0 targets is the real concern for me, especially in a team that as we mentioned earlier, doesn't have a secure running back room at the moment. They're going to be a pass-first offense. We know Ladd has been balling out, but QJ should be right there, dude. He should be that wide receiver too. I do think moving forward, though, he'll improve, watch the film, and I'm not worried about him. And so definitely don't move off of him. And as a QJ owner, I'm still a believer.
Yeah, no, I think there could easily be better days ahead. And speaking of better days ahead, this could be interesting for the next guy as well. Keenan Allen at the Los Angeles Chargers. So same team here. Talk about four receptions this week, 5 targets, 44 yards, 8.4 PPR fantasy points. Again, we mentioned Ladd McConkey, Gadsden getting that involvement. We've had Vidal in the backfield really taking over the past couple of weeks. So kind of a redistribution of opportunity in that Chargers offense. And I think it's come at Keenan Allen's expense. That he's the trusted safety blanket option for Justin Herbert, especially on some of those broken plays, can win those one-on-one matchups, has very nasty route running, even at this age, over 30. So good to see him get some involvement, but given the offensive output, I think they had close to 40 points in this game. I would have expected a little bit more involvement from Keenan Allen. But yeah, I feel like this is a floor game for Keenan Allen in the same breath. He's been a pretty dependable flex option through this season. So I can see him having a rebound here, maybe getting touchdowns back on his side. But I think at this stage, he is a bit more touchdown dependent than you would like to see in a flex. And so I think we were reminded of that this week. And I think that will probably continue moving forward, that he's going to have some touchdown dependency, especially as we mentioned, Quentin Johnston may be looking to get back to form in coming weeks.
Yeah, I do think he's still a reliable target. You mentioned being that safety blanket. I do think the issue with him is, like you did talk about him too, with Gaston. Gaston being the big tight end, the young guy, he's going to get a lot of targets down in that red zone, which is where Allen has kind of been feasting this year. I think what can go well for him though is if they're playing a really, really tough defense, and QJ's kind of off for the day and Ladd's getting double coverage, then not a lot of people have 3 or 4 guys in that secondary, or if they have a quick enough linebacker that can stay on a Keenan Allen, even if he is a little bit older. So I really, really like him. And as we talked about several times now, it's just a pass first offense. So even to have 8.4 fantasy points and still be considered kind of one of your losers for your week, it's not an awful game for him, but it is a solid game from just like a flex position where you really just need somebody salvageable with these bye weeks kind of being heavy right now in the system or in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of maybe some of this opportunity, the bye weeks, of course, impacting players. a big guy that was a pickup before this week was Tez Johnson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he rounds out this segment of losers, the wide receiver spot. Had 5 receptions on 6 targets, had 43 yards, had 9.3 PPR fantasy points. So not a terrible game for a guy that, is a flex, maybe at best, maybe a WR2 with, in terms of highest upside or where he's hitting his highest upside for a week. But yeah, not a great game for Tez Johnson. Not a great game for this Bucs offense. Baker Mayfield looked a little bit rattled, a little bit off in this game. I know they were able to salvage it and get away with the win. The defense stepped up quite big in that game, Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, and they got a critical win against the New Orleans Saints. But good matchup for Tez Johnson. Felt like maybe he would do a little bit more in this matchup. But again, similar to what we mentioned with Keenan Allen, he maybe has a touch of that touchdown dependence as a flex option. So, week to week, he could be maybe a bit more of a dart throw than others, but he's still playing in a great system. So it feels like maybe this is more of a floor game, or maybe this is just a bad game script in terms of this particular game for Tez Johnson against the New Orleans Saints. So I wouldn't advise dropping him immediately, but maybe just monitor matchups moving forward, and also the state of this offense, depending on, Bucky Irving coming back, Chris Godwin coming back. There could be some redistribution of opportunities, but I think Tez Johnson will remain in the plans. Bad week for him, bad week for Emeka Buka as well. So I think the Buccaneers will rebound, and this team should get back on track.
Yeah, definitely. I like you said, I don't know if it was necessarily bad game script, but the Saints, I think, had 4 turnovers in that game. 1 was returned for a touchdown. So their defense was getting short yardage field situations, often in between. And Baker did look uncomfortable at some points. So I will agree with you that for that, I think he only had 5 fantasy points, which is by far his lowest scoring week of the season for a guy that was considered a front runner, if not the front runner for MVP leading into this week. So his stock took a little bit hit with that. But I mean, to still have an efficient game like he did, 9.3 points, not awful, but definitely not as high as you'd like to see out of a Saints team that's kind of, as I can say, like nicely, just not a very competitive franchise at the moment. But I think moving forward, I still have a lot of belief in them. Just like we do with Ibuka. Sucks that since Evans has gone down, Tez Johnson's gonna stay on the field and get consistent snaps. Godwin's injury history kind of just places him firmly in that wide receiver 2 or spot as long as Ibuka is healthy. So I'm not too worried. It is just kind of disappointing if you were kind of in one of those tight games and you're like expecting a 12, 15 point game and you end up losing by 1 or 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this Buccaneers team, we've seen the moxie of Baker Mayfield. I think it's excusable for him to have 1 game off. He's played so well this season. Defense stepped up big time and bailed him out. But yeah, I think Tez Johnson and Emeka Buka, those guys should be fine. It'll be interesting what happens when Chris Godwin comes back and how healthy he looks. I know they've yet to get Bucky Irving back as well, so hopefully they can get him back in the next couple of weeks. But I think this team is still going to be an NFC juggernaut. Not too concerned about Tez Johnson moving forward, but just monitor matchups and look for those advantageous matchups for him in the coming weeks. All right, so we're going to switch over to running backs, losers. First guy here is Cam Skattebo of the New York Giants. We do this all the time, Charlie. Guy gets hurt. I always feel bad about putting these guys on the losers list, especially a guy like a Cam Skattebo who's been so fun to watch. Yeah, had 3 carries for 12 yards and 1 reception on 2 targets for 18 yards and a touchdown. Had 10 PPR points, but the key news here is that he left this game with a dislocated ankle injury. He's going to be out for the season. Looks like he did have a successful surgery, so he will be back next season. And what a team this is going to be with Jackson Dart, Malik Neighbors, Cam Skattebo. Those 3 will be a star-studded cast for this New York Giants team. Hopefully they can stay healthy through the offseason and get back. But yeah, scary injury for Cam Skattebo. Hate to see a guy of his caliber go out, especially when he's got kind of a stranglehold on the running back opportunities in that room. Big blow for the Giants. Not a team that's lined up for a winning season. But yeah, this definitely did not help them as well. Prayers up for him. Hopefully he comes back healthy.
Yeah, dude, it sucks, man. This guy was easily, I think, the fantasy favorite amongst anybody who's been in fantasy leagues this year. Not that they maybe drafted him, but just kind of a surprise late round draft pick. I think a lot of people probably got him in the 7th to 10th round area. Didn't really expect much out of the Giants offense. The unknown with Jackson Dart, Russell Wilson was there. Dabble, how's the scheme going to look? But I think he stole the hearts of all these New Yorkers, man. He stole the hearts of a lot of fantasy fans. I loved Cam Scatterbo. I did have some shares of him in some other leagues as well. As you know, I ended up trading Saquon for him and got burned by him week one. And then unfortunately, you never like to see a guy get hurt like this, man. Thankfully, as you said, the successful surgery. You hope he can get rested up, better for the year, better for next year. Same with Malik Neighbors. This team has just been plagued all season long by it. And it just sucks that you're going to miss out on half a year of reps and kind of cohesion with Jackson Dart from both their wide receiver one and their RB1. I will say though, and we'll talk about him. I think we talk on him a little bit more. And if you're a Tyrone Tracy, if you guys have him, and definitely look into him, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyrone Tracy is going to be a part of our future segment. So yeah, good note there, Charlie. All right, so let's finish up. Last guy on our losers list for this week is Jordan Mason of the Minnesota Vikings. He had 4 carries for 3 yards and 1 reception on 1 target for 3 yards. Total of 1.6 PPR fantasy points. Not a good game for Jordan Mason. Not a good game for Aaron Jones as well. But the reason that Jordan Mason is on our list is he was recommended as a pretty solid RB2 option given the health concerns with Aaron Jones. I think game script played a big factor in this game. Vikings are forced to throw the ball quite a bit, fell behind early to the Chargers. Not a great game for either of these guys. Aaron Jones had 5 carries for 15 yards, 2 catches for 4 targets for 15 yards, 5 PPR fantasy points. But I think the big note here is, this is a game where Aaron Jones is coming back, so his involvement wasn't as much as it may be in future weeks. And Jordan Mason didn't really do much to stake his claim to that RB1 role in this offense. And so this could be a workload split. And this could be a case where Jordan Mason is now a much more volatile flex play week to week and may even lose out on some of that goal line opportunity, depending on the health of Aaron Jones and how he gets reacclimated in this offense. So worrying signs for Jordan Mason. I think many of us expected this with Aaron Jones coming back, but I don't know if we expected it on the same level. So that's why he's on our losers list this week. And this will be an interesting backfield to monitor moving forward.
Yeah, I'm completely out on the Vikings, man. I don't know if you saw the report about Carson Wentz playing with a torn labrum and everything like that, but I'm not a fan of kind of that whole situation. I like KOC. I think he's a great coach. I don't know how much involvement he is. I'm not in the front offices. I'm not in the coaching meetings, but to let a guy play for 2.5 weeks with a torn labrum when he could barely, play on his shoulder. And I don't know if you saw the clips of him in tears on the sideline or looked about it, which is just devastating for a guy that's already suffered so many crucial injuries in his life and was at one point in his career a front runner for an MVP until he tore his ACL versus the Rams diving to the goal line, which is just, unfortunate, dude. But from the Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones perspective, they don't have a QB I trust right now. Their offensive line has been incredibly shaky. And I just think as a whole, the offense has not been good week to week this year. They're down big in a lot of games. They get down early. And so that doesn't bode well for 2 running backs who are going to need to get it a lot. And Aaron Jones isn't what he once was as far as being a pass catching back. He does still have the potential at times. He can get you a touchdown here and there, but he is older by those running back standards. His best years are behind him. And like you said, with Jordan Mason, he had every opportunity to kind of take over and show that he was the true RB1 when Aaron Jones was out, but he didn't prove that. So moving forward, what does that show this team, show the coaching staff and the fan base as a whole? And if you have any shares of these guys, that there's not really a lot of trust and, it's week to week worth monitoring, but I don't think it's worth staking your whole claim and, banking on getting a W out of either of these guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a tough situation to watch. We've seen many teams split carries between the running backs. So this will be an interesting situation. But yeah, I don't see this team really going anywhere this season. And so, yeah, we'll just see how this opportunity plays out. Not a great situation for either guy, though. So with that, Charlie, we're actually going to take our first break, and to our viewers as well. We're going to come back here shortly. So we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
All right, and we're back with the buy section. We just finished up our winners or losers, so I'm going to head over the buy, go through all our candidates on the wide receivers, tight ends, and RBs, and then Kaushik is going to take over with who he thinks we should sell for this next week here in week 9. So the wide receivers I'm starting off with is Mecca Ibuka for the Bucks, and he had kind of a down week by his standards coming in. I know he's a rookie, but He's shown that he's been the best rookie in this draft class, and I don't think it's been particularly close. And he had 3 receptions on 9 targets for just 65 yards. Did finish with 9.5 fantasy points, but still one of these guys worth monitoring. As we talked about with the Chris Godwin injury, still uncertain when he comes back. Bucky Irving isn't back fully healthy. It's been Rachaad White's backfield. We just talked about it with Tez Johnson, where he's kind of fitting into this whole equation. K. Doddins, it's kind of shown that he's trending up and up. But if somebody's willing to get rid of it, Emeka Ibuka, definitely go after him, man. Baker Mayfield did have a down week, but we talked about it as more circumstantial due to the defense falling out as much as they did, creating havoc and causing 4 turnovers from the Saints. Go after him. I'm sure he's going to be tough to get, but I mean, if you're willing to part ways with some of your deeper positions, do it. As well as the next guy I'm going to mention, and that's George Pickens, man. He had 7 receptions on 9 targets for 78 yards. The whole day, it felt like Dallas was just playing from behind. They had an awful day offensively and defensively. I think that was Dak's worst game of the season. Didn't look sharp at all. The Broncos defense was just causing him havoc and kind of getting them off script a lot. But Pickens still had an efficient day. I mean, for a wide receiver 2 candidate that's playing beside CeeDee Lamb, who's been a target hog these last 3 years, to still have 14.8 fantasy points to go along with those 7 receptions on 9 targets. I think an overall solid day for him. We talked about him last week. Definitely somebody that's worth going out and getting. I don't think he's going to go away anytime soon. I think those 4 weeks off without CeeDee Lamb helped develop the timing that we saw with Dak Prescott. And I think there's a lot of trust that's been built there. And we know with Javonte Williams kind of still in that RB2 conversation, flex 1 spot. But this is a pass first offense. And with how bad the defense is, they're going to consistently be throwing in the second half of ball games. So go out, get George Pickens. I'm sure there are people that haven't been monitoring his situation as a whole. And I really like him moving forward, even though I was really hard on him at the start of the season. The next guy, too, didn't have a great game by his standards. Did have a touchdown, but he went and finished the game with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 55 yards and finished up with 16.5 fantasy points. And that's DK Metcalf from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kind of a similar situation. Their defense hasn't been incredibly great. They did lead at halftime over the Packers on Sunday Night Football, 16-7. But it did just kind of look like things were a little bit off with him and Aaron Rodgers. I know Rodgers kind of got after him at one point, said some words that I won't repeat on this podcast. But still, he's a touchdown hog of an offense. We saw the week before he didn't get a touchdown when Rodgers threw 3 different tight ends. But I think he is the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in that system. He doesn't really have anybody to compete with outside of Austin. They're not consistently running the ball well. Jaylen Warren did have a solid game, not great by any means. But I do think with Aaron Rodgers, he's always shown that he's going to throw to his trusted wide receiver 1 guy. We saw that with Jordy Nelson for many years. We saw it with Greg Jennings. And we saw it with Devontae Adams his last few years with the Green Bay. And even with Garrett Wilson and Devontae in Jets. So I think go out, get DK Metcalf. He can still be a solid wide receiver 2 on your team. I just don't think he's necessarily wide receiver 1 right now. And the next guy, the final of the wide receivers, kind of to touch on what we talked about in the loser section with running backs, and that's Justin Jefferson, man. Had a solid game for an overall wide receiver standpoint from wide receiver 2 or a flex spot perspective. He finished the game with 7 receptions on 11 targets for 74 yards. They were down big that entire game versus the Chargers. Didn't feel like they had any chance to come back. I don't think there's anything wrong with Jettas. I think it's more just due to the inability to be able to effectively run the ball. Jordan Addison's situation. TJ Hawkinson finally broke through. Hadn't been great. But overall, as we know, if you don't have an offensive line and you don't have a solid QB, you're not going to do a lot with passing the ball. And he hasn't necessarily had either of those things this year. There's been a myriad of injuries on the offensive line as well as the quarterback room. J.J. McCarthy started the year, goes out in week 2 with that high ankle sprain. Carson Wentz fills in. I think Carson Wentz, as we talked about, tore his labrum in London, I think in the first half. And I think they were playing Cleveland in that one. So this has been the last 2.5 weeks. But to still rack up 14.5 fantasy points with the QB playing on one arm shows he's going to go well. And I really like him. I think he's a guy you can go out and get, for very low, which is probably something that's improbable to say in past years when this guy was the first or second best consensus wide receiver in the NFL and in fantasy. And if you want to throw CD in that conversation, more than happy to. But I think a lot of people will be looking to move on from Jettas, especially with the uncertainty of JJ McCarthy and how he's going to look coming into this first week back after the high ankle sprain. And we're going to move into the tight end section though now. This is Rondé Gaston. We talked about it with Ladd McConkey earlier, one of our biggest winners. We talked about it QJ being one of our biggest losers, as well as Keenan Allen. And Gaston, man, he's burst onto the scene these last 3 weeks, been an absolute mammoth, dude, a monster, the reincarnation of Antonio Gates. Finished up with 5 receptions on 5 targets to go along with 77 yards. Go along with another tutty, man. I think he's got a touchdown in 3 straight weeks right now. Doesn't have any threats in that system. Nobody else is going to be taking shares from him or snaps on the tight end room. Like we've talked about 4 or 5 times now, this is a pass-first offense. We know how good of an arm Justin Herbert has. He's shown the ability to play off script. Keenan Allen is kind of more of that touchdown red zone dependent guy, but I think Gaston is the for sure target, the number 1 target in that red zone area, and he ended up finishing with 18.7 points. I think by now he's no longer kind of that feel-good story. I think he's probably, soaked up on a lot of teams, and a lot of people are going to try and hold him as much as possible. But if you can kind of find and make a huge offer for him, definitely go out and do it if tight end is something you badly need and you have depth at other positions. Next guy is also in that same conversation, man, and I've been beating my chest for this guy to be the best tight end in football, especially when it was National Tight End Week. So got to give these guys some loves. And that's Tucker Kraft, man. This guy is a freaking crazy savage. As you guys all know by now, I'm a Packers fan. I love the Green Bay Packers. They balled out on Sunday night, and Tucker Kraft was the star of the show. Jordan Love and him have shown when they're in sync, this looks like the best tight end QB duo since the 2 or 3 years ago with Mahomes and Kelsey. Kraft went on to finish 7 receptions on 9 targets for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns. Finished with 33.3 fantasy points. And of those 143 yards, I think around 115 of them came after the catch. He's shown that he's a dog when he gets into the open field. He's shown the ability to shed tackles. Jordan Love had this one throw where he's going off his back foot, rolling out to his right. Kraft, it's a lollipop throw. Kraft comes up, probably got away with a little bit of offensive pass interference, makes the catch, though, and then runs for another 40 or 50 yards after that down in the red zone area of the Pittsburgh Steelers. The only issue, and is as we talked about Jordan Love, as he loved last week, is he loves to spread the ball around. Doesn't have a necessarily like, this is my go-to guy every single time. Kraft should be that guy in this system. He's shown the ability that he can play everywhere on the field. And I think with these games coming out and the ability to produce like this, that there's going to be a incentive to get in the ball more often. And I really like his upside moving forward. Speaking of upside, though, dude, this guy was the bona fide kind of clear-cut number 1 pick as far as from the tight end room coming into this last year's draft. I'm still uncertain why the Chicago Bears did the Chicago Bears, but I shouldn't be surprised at this point and took Colston Loveland over him because Tyler Warren for the Indianapolis Colts, absolute steal, man. I know a lot of people were high on him when he came out of Penn State, and they were right, man. Finished with 4 receptions and 4 targets for 53 yards, 9.3 fantasy points. Didn't have an insane day by any means, but they didn't need him to. We talked about it, Jonathan Taylor. We talked about Michael Pittman. But this guy doesn't have any competition in the tight end room. When you have a rookie tight end like this, just like with Gaston, and you can trust him with a veteran QB and Daniel Jones and Shane Steichen, and they're humming on all levels like this guy's going to show that when given the ability and when called upon, he can go out and get you those 15, 20 points and potentially into those 25-point range. I think this 9.3 fantasy points is kind of the low end. And if you're playing in non-TEP leagues, for those who don't know, the tight end premium leagues where you're getting an incentive, maybe the 1.5 for every tight end catch, to have a floor like this out of the tight end position, which has kind of been dead outside of 3 guys the last few years, really, really like what they've seen. And I think, go out, get Tyler Warren. And if you can get him for cheap, a couple bench players, maybe a flex spot guy, he can fill in nicely in that role. We're going to move on to the running back room right now. And this is a surprise running back who at the start of the season didn't have a lot of opportunities. His role was very uncertain, was kind of that RB3, RB4 range on his own squad. And that's Kamani Vidal, dude, for the Los Angeles Chargers. Ended up finishing the day with 23 carries for 117 yards, Did have a reception to go along with that on 2 targets for 10 yards. Finished with 19.7 fantasy points, dude. For a guy to come in, Najee Harris came into the year with the eye injury, then leaves with, I think, the torn Achilles. O'Marion Hampton comes in, drafted really, really high. A lot of people thought this guy could be the second or third best running back in this draft class. He then gets hurt, gets put on our IR. Hassan Haskins comes into the fold. Oh, this guy's going to get the bulk of our carries. I don't know how much we're going to do revolving door. Vidal might just be involved in passing situations. It took Vidal one game, and then he just shows that I can be a guy, just like we saw with Rico Dowdle in Carolina. You can be that guy when thrown in the right position, and he's proved it, dude. So when Hampton does come back and gets healthy, Vidal's going to have every right to lay claim and say, hey, I'm just as good, if not better than this guy when called upon. And I love what they've seen. And with the high-powered offense that they do have, and with Justin Herbert being a top 8 QB that he is, I don't see any reason that Vidal can't consistently produce from a week in, week out system, or week in, week out perspective. Just because the defenses aren't going to be loading the boxes, those safeties aren't going to be coming down. They're going to be stacking 8 deep in there. They're going to have to play back. Linebackers are going to have to play in coverage and zone. And so I really like his upside, and I think a lot of people might still be kind of bullish on him. So if you have the ability to go stag him up, definitely go out and do it. Speaking of a rookie running back, and I was really, really high on this guy coming in because I was just uncertain on J.K. Dobbins, but that's R.J. Harvey for the Denver Broncos, man. Didn't have like the gaudiest stats when you look on paper, but he did have an efficient day, man. 7 carries for 46 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. Did have 1 reception on 1 target for 5 yards, and to go along with the reception touchdown as well. Finished the day with 24.1 fantasy points. I know they weren't going against a good Dallas Broncos or Dallas Cowboys defense. However, I think to show that they have the ability to blow these teams out, he's still getting good situation. He's still getting reps. He kind of hasn't gone in the shadows like we've seen from other rookie running backs. Like Travion Henderson was kind of in that spot early on in the season. Caleb Johnson from the Steelers looks like he's just completely, off the rails practice squad type player right now. So for RJ Harvey to kind of consistently stay in the mix after what we've seen from J.K. Dobbins at times, in a situation where they're going to pass the ball a lot and rely on Bo Nix's arms, really high on him. And I'm sure there's actually some people who would definitely be willing to move him because of the week-to-week inconsistency that he's shown. But he does have another opportunity to prove himself playing the Texans this next week. And speaking of Travion Henderson's counterpart, a guy that we've kind of been back and forth on this year, and that's Ramondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots. 14 carries for 34 yards. Did have 1 reception on 2 targets and 15 yards, 5.9 points. Didn't have the greatest week by any standards, but this offense is humming right now, man. They're going to have to call upon somebody to run the ball. We know how Mike Vrabel loves his veteran running backs. Travion Henderson hasn't fully gotten his name into the mix yet. I think he did get some action this weekend, which is nice for him and for people who kind of been hanging on to that fantasy ownership. But Stevenson is still the guy that they're going to call upon. I think there's probably a good chance that he's on waiver wires right now. I don't think a lot of people have been rostering him just because the running back room has been such a kind of question mark in that system. But go out, get him. And if he is still on somebody's roster, definitely an easy trade candidate to go out and attack. And finally, the last guy in the buy section for us before I hand it over to my boy Kaushik, and that's Javonte Williams for the Dallas Cowboys. We mentioned, Broncos had a big game versus the Cowboys. Cowboys didn't have the greatest offensive game from any perspective as far as didn't feel like anybody necessarily popped off. Jake Ferguson, I think, was held to 0 fantasy points. Mentioned George Pickens had a solid game. CD didn't have his greatest game. Dak probably had his lowest game of the year in fantasy points. But I know a guy, and that's Javonte Williams, who did have a solid game with 13 carries for 41 yards, along with 2 tutties. Had a 1 reception on 2 targets for another 8 yards and finished up with 17.9 fantasy points. So a solid day for a guy who I think a lot of people touted as a RB2, a flex spot for him. And I do think there's a real possibility that people would be willing to trade him and move him. And if you have the ability to go out and get him with a team that, as we talked about, is going to be playing from behind a lot of times. If they're going to be in ball games, it's going to be high scoring affairs like we saw in that Giants win where they won 40 to 37, or that tie versus the Packers. Go out, get Javonte Williams, man. A solid guy all around. He has the ability to pass catch as well. And I think there's a real chance people would be interested in moving him if you have some depth at other spots that may be in need. And for that, I'm going to finish up and hand it over to my boy Kaushik. And he's going to take you through the cells. So the floor is yours, my dude.
Awesome. No, thanks, Charlie. So we're going to start with the sell section here. First section here is running backs. And the first guy here is Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers. Had 8 rushes for 54 yards and 5.4 PPR points. I think he's an interesting sell candidate, just given that he's had very tremendous upside as of like 2-3 weeks ago. When Chuba Hubbard was out, he was the go-to bell cow in this offense, had both running game and passing game involvement, and had just absolutely amazing numbers. Even last week, I think he had 17 carries for somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 yards. So he's a solid guy. He's going to get some passing game involvement as well. I think the reason to sell him is there is some volatility in terms of, is he going to be the goal line back? We saw Chuba Hubbard scored a touchdown late in this game. And so there might still be that trade-off of responsibilities between him and Chuba Hubbard. And that workload split isn't clearly defined. But just leveraging the upside that he has shown, I think he could definitely be a valuable trade piece for you and even part of a potential package to go out and get a better wide receiver or a better running back. So definitely look to move on from Rico Dowdle. And then the next guy, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And many of you might even ask, why is Alvin Kamara on this list? I'll get to that in a moment. So I'll read out his stats. 6 rushes for 21 yards and 2 receptions on 2 targets for 24 yards, 6.5 PPR points. Hasn't been a great running back this entire season. I think he's been very low by his efficiency standards. They haven't used him in the passing game, but there are a couple of reasons why I think Alvin Kamara could have a bit of a resurgence later this season. The first is that Keandre Miller, his counterpart, has been shut down for the season, is actually on injured reserve, and is no longer going to play. And so Alvin Kamara has a clear stranglehold on opportunities in this offense. And hopefully he'll get more passing game involvement. And thankfully, there might be one change that the Saints make, which is Spencer Rattler going out and Tyler Schaff, their rookie quarterback, coming in. And that may open up some opportunities for Alvin Kamara. We know how rookie quarterbacks like to use their safety blankets, their tight ends and running backs to get themselves going and get themselves acclimated in the offense. We've talked about Chris Olave and how dependable he's been, but Alvin Kamara has been the centerpiece of that offense for many years and maybe could experience a bit of a resurgence if they decide to go forward with that QB change in New Orleans. And so, again, he could be a guy. He's maybe more of a sell low at this point, but just given that there could be some changes coming, maybe someone's willing to buy him for maybe a guy even like a Tez Johnson coming over to your side in the trade. Next is wide receivers. First guy, and maybe Broncos fans will be unhappy with me, but we're going to go with this anyway, is Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Had 4 receptions on 6 targets, 67 yards, 10.7 PPR points. I think the reason to move on from a guy like a Courtland Sutton, there's been a bit more volatility than we might expect. Troy Franklin has eaten into volume, as well as, RJ Harvey is now getting some passing game volume, some rushing volume. And J.K. Dobbins, of course, is the workhorse of that offense. And I think Courtland Sutton, for that reason, becomes a bit more game script dependent. We've seen that the Broncos have really relied on the run when they get a lead early, especially against weaker teams like the Bengals and Cowboys at home. And if they face similar conditions against other teams, I think that's bad news for Courtland Sutton fantasy owners because he's not going to see as many of those opportunities down the field. We mentioned Troy Franklin at the outset of the segment. I think he's played a big part in that passing offense, maybe a bigger part than we might expect. And so Courtland Sutton is a guy I would look to move on from and maybe try and go land a low end to mid RB2 if you're lacking at the running back spot. Second guy, maybe more of a sell high, is Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. I touched upon him in the earlier segment. Had 8 receptions on 12 targets for 63 yards. Also had 1 rush for -3 yards. Total of 14 PPR points. He's been a solid wide receiver too the past couple of weeks. Has been a dependable target for Spencer Rattler and the Saints team in the passing game. We mentioned the QB change potentially coming to Tyler Schaff. So it's unclear what that means for Chris Olave, whether he's going to see more volume, less volume, and also whether touchdown regression is going to work in his favor. So that is one thing to monitor here, just depending on how the Saints team looks. But given how good Chris Olave has been the past couple of weeks, I think I would look to move on from him for just the reason of the Saints offense is a bit volatile and could be experiencing more volatility with the QB change. Injuries have also been a part for Chris Olave, and something that you might want to think about as we move into the business end of the season and the fantasy playoffs. So maybe look to sell high on him if you can get some good value back. And the final guy in our wide receiver segment is Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Had 6 receptions on 9 targets for 84 yards in this game. Had 14.4 PPR fantasy points. Again, another guy that I would look to sell high on. He's been a dependable wide receiver too in this offense. Has had back-to-back pretty solid weeks. AJ Brown was out this week, so had a little bit more elevation in terms of opportunities in the passing game. The Eagles didn't really need him, just given how well Saquon Barkley played, but he still played a factor in this game, and I think he had a solid game by wide receiver 2 and flex standards. I think Devontae Smith, he's a solid wide receiver 2, as we've said, but maybe given that this Eagles team is maybe finding a second life with the rushing game, and we've also not really seen Jalen Hurts get going in the rushing game as much, maybe some changes coming where there's some course correction back to more of a rushing-centric offense. And so, again, might be a reason to trade Devontae Smith and, again, try to get some good value back, but definitely don't move him for something cheap. And then the final guy, we've got one tight end on this list, and that's Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. Again, had the good old goose egg this week, 0 receptions on 1 target for 0 yards and 0 total PPR points. This was a pretty good opportunity for him against a Broncos team that lacks good linebackers, especially with Dre Greenlaw missing this game again. And so this could have been another good opportunity for Jake Ferguson, especially given that the Cowboys, we know, have to score a ton of points to keep up, given the weaknesses that they have on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, just didn't come up with a good game in this one. Had no involvement at all. Just a tough game by all standards for Dak and the entire team. So again, could be a reason to sell him just given that the entire team struggled outside of Javonte Williams getting those 2 touchdowns. And if you have some depth at the tight end spot and want to package him for maybe a wide receiver or running back, this could be a good time to do that and try to get some value back. So with that, we're going to conclude the buy-sell segment. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll move into our final segment for the week. We'll see y'all shortly.
And we're back with our final 2 sections. As Kaushik mentioned, we're going to do our watch list and then go into what is probably my favorite segment of the week, and that's the games to look forward to. We're going to start off with the wide receivers, though, man, and that's going to be Kayshon Boutte and Stephon Diggs for the New England Patriots. The offense has been humming for them, and this weekend they both produced kind of a little inverse of what you might have thought, though, with Diggs being the wide receiver 2 role and Boutte being wide receiver 1, and Boutte finished with 3 receptions on 5 targets for 75 yards to go along with the touchdown, ended with 16.5 fantasy points. And Diggs also had another 3 receptions on 5 targets for 14 yards and a touchdown to go along with 10.4 points. So Diggs was mostly in the red zone role where Boutte was kind of stretching the field, getting a lot of those deeper targets as we saw. But overall, make sure you guys keep an eye out for both these guys, with Drake May being the most accurate QB in the NFL right now.
Yeah, no, I think this was a good game. Diggs obviously scoring his first touchdown for the New England Patriots in this one, so that was a good story there. Good to see him get some involvement at the goal line. Overall, I think these 2 guys are going to have continued opportunity. I think the reason why they're on the watch list is it's still a bit unclear who is the true WR1 in this offense. I think Boutte's been more of a flex play for those longer touchdowns down the field, and Diggs has been more of that PPR merchant, seeing those targets underneath. So their roles are pretty clearly defined, but just given the week-to-week fluctuations of this offense and how well they run the football, it's a bit unclear who's going to be the real guy to pick up. So just keep an eye on both these guys moving forward.
Yeah, and the next guy we're going to talk about is kind of in the same boat, man, and that's Christian Watson. Welcome back, by the way. Tore his ACL in Week 18 last year, and really had a speedy recovery when you think about it, all things considered. And he finished his day, dude, with 4 receptions and 4 targets to go along with 85 yards and 12.5 fantasy points. We know what he was doing in his rookie year with Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers was mostly meant for that vertical, downfield threat. And it's been no different in the Jordan Love era. And so really, really excited for him to be back. I know he's probably not on a lot of people's rosters right now. And kind of, as we've talked about, that team is a revolving door where Love likes to spread it around, doesn't have that consensus wide receiver 1. Tucker Kraft is going to lead the team in targets, but to have an effective game like this to come out, especially after shaking off all that rust, and he made a nice catch down. I think Love was throwing, going to his right and throwing back to his left, and threw it in between the safety and the corner, just kind of dropped a dime over him. And you saw Christian Watson make a tough catch. To see that is really, brings a lot of confidence, not only to fantasy owners' mind, but Packers fans and myself all together. Definitely not a guy I would go out and trade for at the moment because there's just a lot of uncertainty. However, definitely worth keeping a track of with the team that's kind of so banged up in that wide receiver room.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it. Welcome back in this game. The Steelers secondary has been pretty generous to wide receivers, so good to see Christian Watson and Jordan Love take advantage of that. I think Jordan Love had about 360 passing yards in this game. Christian Watson, absolutely insane per target average of over 21 yards per target. And this is the kind of guy that we're used to seeing. Big plays down the field, pushing the ball. This Packers team is very efficient when they can run the ball with Josh Jacobs and throw the ball down the field with Jordan Love and really push it deep down the field. And so as long as he can stay healthy, I think he's going to stay in that flex WR2 conversation, but a great game for him and hopefully the start of a coming out party for him as well as this Packers team that's been so good this season.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think the offense is only going to trend up more as we saw in that second half. They exploded. I think they finished the second half with about 28 points. They were down 16-7 at the halftime to the Steelers. So really excited for them. And another guy that had a really good week after kind of having some downtime, and not because of his own fault, but mostly just due to the inability at the QB position. And that's Zay Flowers for the Baltimore Ravens, man. Finished the game with 7 receptions on 9 targets to go along with 63 yards, and also had a rush for 8 yards. So, and he finished the day with 14.1 points. So really nice for him. Lamar Jackson was listed as questionable going into this game. A lot of people kind of put stake on him playing. However, he was held out, and it looks like he's going to hopefully come back next week. But they do bring in Tyler Huntley, and they do try to run the same system with Huntley in there because he does have the ability to kind of escape the pocket, be a little bit more of a mobile quarterback that Cooper Rush doesn't exemplify. And that bodes well for Zay Flowers, especially on those off-script plays, because we know how that they like to run those crossing routes across the middle of the field with him. And I think moving forward, I think he's been on a lot of people's rosters in that wide receiver 2 flex spot. But I think he's only going to trend up from here, especially with Lamar working his way back from injury.
Yeah, this was a great game for Zay Flowers, 14.1 PPR points, staying in that flex WR2 conversation. And he did it with the backup quarterback, Tyler Huntley. No slouch back there at quarterback. We've seen Tyler Huntley has played several snaps for this team, but not an ideal situation for Zay Flowers to be playing with the guy not named Lamar Jackson. We've seen how much Lamar Jackson has done for this offense and also how much he unlocked Zay Flowers in the first half of the season. So good to see Zay Flowers continue to produce. Without Lamar, hopefully Lamar returns this week and that offense gets back to where we know it is. But again, he's on our watch list, I would say, Charlie, just given the situation right now with that team and just the fact that we're monitoring what Lamar looks like when he gets back. But we know what Zay Flowers is capable of, and this guy could easily jump into that WR2 conversation soon. So keep an eye on him in trades if anybody's got him and is maybe thinking about dealing him. I don't think he's going to be on the waiver wire at this point, but definitely a guy to watch for as part of a trade deal or maybe a trade package.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the next guy is kind of in the same boat as him with the QB uncertainty, and that's Tedero McMillan for the Panthers. And I mean, he had 7 receptions on 10 targets, go along with 99 yards and 16.9 points. And to do that with a rushing room or running back room that wasn't great this week, they didn't get a lot of push on the offensive line in that area. And then with the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton kind of starting back and getting a throwback into the mid 2010s. I think that's, shows how great he is. He shows that it kind of is elevating himself into that true wide receiver 1 role where you can just kind of put me anywhere on the field. You can put me with anybody, and I'm just a true playmaker on the outside that I have the ability to separate myself from defenders. To have such an effective week does, show a lot of promise, and you hope that Bryce Young can kind of get back, because they've been showing that they have a lot of true connection here in this first season.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, the connection with Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton's not a guy that has played very minimal football. He's played a lot of football. He's played for several teams at this point, and is a guy who can throw the ball quite well, throw the ball down the field. Elevates the play of the receivers around him. We saw that for Adam Thielen, I think a couple of years back with Andy Dalton. And so good to see Tet McMillan have that rapport with Andy Dalton. This game got out of hand pretty quickly, but still nice to see 7 receptions and 99 yards, 13, a little more than 14 yards per catch. So we know what Tet McMillan's capable of, the big play upside, the chunk gains down the field. I think a little bit of, game script and just the situation of the game got in the way here. Hopefully this Panthers team can rebound. We've seen them play in a lot of competitive games this season. And so Tet McMillan, I think, is going to continue to be a big part of their plans. I think the reason he's on our watch list this week is just the QB uncertainty. Will Andy Dalton continue to be the starter moving forward, or does Bryce Young come back? And what does that look like for Tet McMillan moving forward? We know that Bryce Young and Tet McMillan, they have that connection as well. But Tet tends to disappear in the second half of games, and also Bryce's height plays a factor. And so that's one thing to keep an eye on, but definitely a guy to watch for and a guy who could have some big days ahead.
Yeah, I'm really excited on Tet, and the next guy showed a lot of promise as well, and that's Jalen Noel for the Houston Texans, man, a rookie wide receiver that was drafted out of Iowa State in the mid to later rounds of this most recent draft, and he finished the day with 5 receptions on 6 targets for 63 yards, go along with 11.3 fantasy points. Nico Collins is hurt. We don't know how long. I'm not sure with how long his injury is going to hamper him out. CJ Stroud was kind of just working with a strung together wide receiver corps with Higgins and Xavier Hutchinson, all three Iowa State guys, by the way. So it looks like they have some fancy for the Cyclone boys. But I mean, a great day for him, and it'll be really, really interesting to see how well he fares versus an elite Broncos secondary, even though they will be down Patrick Surtain and Noel. If he can continue to trend up, this is going to, bode well for fantasy owners. And I don't think he's on a lot of rosters right now. He might be in some deeper leagues. However, I think there should be a lot of eyes that you keep out for him, just because, as I mentioned, they don't have a clear-cut wide receiver one right now with Nico Collins being out with an injury.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. Nico Collins has been the one in that offense and the no doubt one. So we know how good he is. But just given the inconsistencies with this Texans offense, ever since Tank Dell went down, this team has been a bit more reliant on, Nico Collins and maybe just a revolving cast of receivers. But even with Nico Collins, we see that week-to-week fluctuation. Some weeks he's completely shut down. Some weeks he's got a bit of a pulse. And so Jalen Noel, the reason he's on our watch list is he's really that big play threat, that home run hitter for this offense. We've seen Xavier Hutchinson maybe step into that Nico Collins role while Nico Collins has been out, or while Nico Collins has been fending off many of those double teams to be that underneath guy for CJ Stroud. And so Jalen Noel brings that game-breaking upside. I think he's the guy that CJ looks for deep down the field, still throws a beautiful deep ball. And this is a guy that, I would definitely keep an eye out. If he does well against this Broncos secondary this week, I think many people are going to start picking him up because he's a great flex option, especially in those 2 flex leagues. And, you should be one of those people, right? So keep an eye on this guy, see how he does this next week, see what his consistency looks like. But I think he has game-breaking upside if he can continue to remain part of this passing offense.
Yeah, and I think the next guy, as you mentioned, definitely not even worth monitoring. I'm sure he's going to be the most picked up and sought after waiver pickup in all of fantasy football this week, and that's Tyrone Tracy for the New York Giants, man. Mostly just due to the Scatabo injury. I'm sure people had him rostered, kind of had him on the bench. Just potential injury because Scatabo is seen taking some hard hits, and but Tracy did when he came in. Filled in and had 10 carries for 39 yards, along with 2 receptions on 3 targets for 14 yards for 7.3 fantasy points. He was the RB1 in this room last year to go along with Devin Singletary. So he does have a lot of promise, has shown that he has the ability to kind of be that lead back. However, I'm not really, really high on him because there's a reason they did draft Scatabo. There's a reason Scatabo was getting the, majority of the carries in that system. However, somebody has to run the ball. Jackson Dart can't do it all, and I think Tyrone Tracy is, he's going to be the guy for the remainder of the season because I don't see them making any trade acquisitions.
Yeah, no, this is another next man up situation. We've talked about this with the Bucks and their receiving core, but with Tyrone Tracy and the New York Giants, Tyrone Tracy was the bell cow of this offense, was then usurped by Cam Scatabo coming in and having a great season. And now it looks like he will take over running back 1 duties. And Tyrone Tracy is a converted wide receiver, catches the ball still very well. So he's going to be relevant in PPR leagues because he's going to be the guy, right? And we've seen that this Giants team needs playmakers. Outside of Malik Neighbors, who's now out, and Cam Scatabo, who's now out, they really were searching for that next guy. And maybe Tyrone Tracy will start to see more opportunities just based off of that because wide receiver room is still a little bit, unproven, a little bit of, a dart throw at this point, if you will. Theo Johnson has shown some weekly upside, but it's not a very consistent tight end. We know how good Jackson Dart is, so I'm not too concerned about him. But yeah, I think Tyrone Tracy is going to have to step up as that next man up and hopefully keep the Giants competitive. So he should definitely be on your waiver list this week. If he's on waivers, go ahead and pick him up.
And I think the next guy too is definitely worth. And I think a lot of people do have him in deeper leagues. And he's not going to be the RB1 in that situation or that system. That's going to be Devon Achane, but it's Ollie Gordon for the Miami Dolphins, man. He had 10 rushes for 46 yards to go along with another catch on that one target for 20 yards and a receiving touchdown to go finish his day up with 13.6 fantasy points. So he's shown that when given opportunities, he's a real guy. I mean, he can be a great goal line back. Kind of has a bigger body than Achane, where Achane is more of that shiftier. You get him outside, as we've seen in the past, them great in the open field. But Ollie Gordon has a lot of promise, especially with Tua Tagovailoa, and we talked about it with Jalen Waddle earlier. A lot of uncertainty week to week with the wide receiver room, with Tyreek's injury, especially with the QB room. Tua doesn't look like he's going to probably have a future moving forward with them, but Ollie Gordon and Devon Achane definitely look like they're there to stay, and they're the most reliable options in that offense.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it. Ollie Gordon, I think, is a good option for this offense. He's been a guy who's maybe seen some volatility, and that's to be expected, right? Devon Achane has been so good for this team. Devon Achane, it's worth noting, has had some injury concerns in the past, has a little bit more of a slim build than other running backs. And so I think that makes him a bit more prone to injury. Also has that sprinter speed. And so that can catch up to him at times. So that's why I think Ollie Gordon makes for a very good stash, as we call it in fantasy football, a guy that you keep on your bench in case of injury. So especially if you have Devon Achane, Ollie Gordon with this week-to-week involvement seems like that next man up. But as you mentioned, Charlie, he could have some intriguing flex upside the rest of the season, especially as a goal line back. We've seen many teams split carries between a predominant kind of early down runner and a more of a goal line finisher. We see this with the Seahawks every week. We see it to an extent with the Lions as well, with Montgomery and Gibbs. And so this could be that next system. And it's also worth noting the Dolphins are not a very competitive team this season. And so they could start trying out more of these younger players to see what they have for the future and figure out their needs for the next draft. So Ollie Gordon could definitely be part of those plans.
Yeah, I was really high on him coming out of the draft, and I got him on one of my kind of startup drafts in one of my dynasty leagues. And I definitely think he's a guy that's worth monitoring. And as is the next guy, man, and that's Isaiah Davis for the New York Jets. We talked about Breece Hall earlier, how he kind of got right back on track, had his best week and best game of the season so far. But Isaiah Davis, I mean, if you can produce like this consistently, I know I don't expect the Jets to score 39 points every single week, but he finished with 7 rushes for 65 yards, along with 5 receptions and 5 targets for another 44 yards, and 1 2-point conversion. Dude, to have 17.9 points as the RB2 in that system. I'm sure nobody started him this week. He would have been crazy and reading some magic ball if you did, but a two-headed monster, as you just talked about with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, that could develop, kind of keep Breece Hall fresher, give a different dynamic and look to this offense, especially with the passing offense kind of being a question mark every single week, with Justin Fields never showing that he's, one of those elevated top QBs, with Garrett Wilson being hurt, and then outside of that, where they're relying on Mason Taylor, their rookie tight end. Isaiah Davis is definitely a worthy pickup. Maybe you can stash him, and if Breece Hall were unfortunately, due to go down with injury, this would give you the next man up in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's seen consistent third down opportunities, and that's going to continue to be the case. Much to Breece Hall's chagrin, Breece Hall, we know, is capable of being a 3-down back for this team. It's a bit of a shame that he's not seeing those third down opportunities, but I think Isaiah Davis is really there to keep Breece Hall fresh. We know that Breece Hall has had some of those injury concerns. Also might be a trade candidate, so the Jets might intentionally be trying to keep him fresh so they can get some good value. And I think that's what makes Isaiah Davis maybe a bit more of an appealing candidate at this point, given that he is seeing weekly involvement. He's been very efficient on the ground, had more than 8 yards per carry. Granted, it was a plus matchup here, but he's seeing involvement in both the rushing and the passing game. And especially given that Garrett Wilson has been out, the top playmaker for the Jets, he has seen some additional opportunities. And so this is a guy, again, could be a good stash candidate. Monitor the Breece Hall situation in terms of trades, as well as injuries, but a smart guy to keep on your roster and delivered again this week.
Yeah, and this next guy, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I definitely think he is worthy of being a potential stash candidate, and that's Samaje Perine for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's been there for quite some time, so he knows the system, but he had 9 rushes for 94 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 reception on 1 target for 6 yards. Finished the day with 17 fantasy points, by far his best outing of the season so far. We talked about it with Chase Brown earlier. He kind of finally broke through. And so maybe just having a different look, as we talked about with the Isaiah Davis and Breece Hall, is just kind of something that Zach Taylor can throw out there and implement. I don't expect P. Ryan to be taking over for Chase Brown. I think there's a reason they kept Chase Brown moved on from Joe Mixon last year. So just kind of monitor him. If you have, an open spot, maybe you throw one of those players on IR. He'll be there for a few more weeks and keep P. Ryan, because if Brown were to go down for injury, P. Ryan would be the next guy up.
Yeah, and it seems like this coaching staff trusts Samaje Perine, Charlie. I think he's the trusted guy in those pass protection situations. He's been a veteran back. Chase Brown's still a little bit on the younger side, especially without Joe Burrow, maybe doesn't have the same comfort in this offense. And so Samaje Perine, great to see him get 100 scrimmage yards. Rare for us to see a RB2 in an offense get over or exactly 100 scrimmage yards in a game. So nice to see him get this kind of involvement, more than 10 yards per carry in this game. Again, a plus matchup, so I don't know if this is going to continue week to week. But again, a guy that's smart to keep on your roster in the event that anything happens to Chase Brown, or also in the event that the Bengals are a bit more dependent on their running backs in any given game. It does seem like they like to alternate a bit more than usual between Chase Brown and Samaje. And so he could continue to see opportunities and maybe even score some touchdowns on the goal line. So another smart player to keep on your roster.
Yeah, and I think the next player we're going to talk about is rostered by a lot of people. I think he was immediately picked up by a majority of the leagues. I know I have multiple shares of him just because of the uncertainty in the running back room, and that's Woody Marks for the Houston Texans, man. He had 11 rushes for 62 yards, along with 4 receptions on 4 targets for 49 yards. Finished the day with 15 points. Has shown the ability to be a dual threat, out of the backfield as well. So I think the biggest thing for him is with the uncertainty of Nico Collins, as you talked about it, the Tank Dell injury kind of affecting this whole entire passing game. They're still relying on young wide receivers from Xavier Hutchinson to Jaden Noel to Jaden Higgins, where Woody Marks, I know he's still in his first year coming out of USC, but he has been the proven playmaker, halfway through the season so far. So who else is, they're going to throw to? He's going to be that 3-down back at the moment because it doesn't look like Dameon Pierce has any involvement in this system. Joe Mixon, he's not going to come back, it sounds like, for this season. So I don't really know what their plan is, but I do know the plan for Woody Marks and all the people that have him is keep him rostered, hold him tight. This guy is going to be the lead back and potentially lead pass catcher for a team when Nico Collins isn't out there.
Yeah, no, this is definitely an interesting situation. We know that Nick Chubb is still there, but kind of on the decline of his career. And so it remains to be seen how much more of Nick Chubb we'll see. But yeah, you hit it on the head, Charlie. I think this guy is clearly the more explosive runner. We saw over 5 yards per carry this week. So another good game. Pretty explosive in the passing game as well. Had over 12 yards per catch. And a pretty healthy outing for a guy that many of us viewed as the RB2 in the system and more of the pass catching change of pace back going into this game. So nice to see him get some opportunities. We'll see how he does this next week against the Broncos, who've been a bit more generous to running backs on the ground. But yeah, definitely a guy that you want to keep rostered, given that Nick Chubb is kind of on that decline. And given that the Texans, it feels like, have a bit of a dearth of playmakers outside of Nico Collins. So could be that next guy up. I know they're a bit unproven in the receiver room. They've got a lot of young guys. You mentioned Jaden Higgins. You mentioned Xavier Hutchinson, as well as we talked about Jaden Noel a little bit earlier. And so Woody Marks, definitely a smart play and a guy that you should keep rostered.
Yeah, and the next guy, I mean, I think a lot of people were super high on last season is, and we're kind of all the way out on this season, and that's Tanks Bigsby for the Philadelphia Eagles. Man, started out the year with the Jaguars, then gets traded for a late round pick. His situation was kind of uncertain. Goes into that running back room. He's RB3 behind Saquon, and then Will Shipley. So it was like, okay, what's his plan? He looked at times last year that he was better than ETN, but then he's this year. It's like, okay, they're focusing more back on ETN again, and then they draft another running back in 210. So it's like, all right, where's Tank in this entire equation? Well, he gets thrust into the situation this week. Has a great showing. I mean, we talked about it with Saquon, who had a big game but left in that third quarter with the leg injury. And Tank Bigby's limited, times, he had 9 rushes for 104 yards, and that was over 10.4 yards per carry. I think he had around 10 fantasy points as well. So to get that in just a quarter and a half of action shows that he has a lot left in the tank. The guy is still incredibly young, and when put in the right situation and given the ability, he can succeed. And I think the biggest thing that you want to monitor with him is just the status of Saquon. If you can go grab him right now and you have an extra spot to roster him, do it, because if Saquon gets pronounced out, then he's going to be the next man up. And even if Saquon doesn't get hurt, dude, and say he's maybe limited in practices, or he spends a day or two in the middle of the week because he's getting DNP, that's going to open up the way for Bigsby again, because that means they're going to kind of split the touches and they're going to try to preserve Saquon for later on in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a contingent watch list player in Tank Bigsby. You mentioned it. He had a pretty solid game this week on limited opportunities against the Giants. Over 100 yards on 9 rushes. So showing that explosiveness and many of those big runs. I think one of them came on a long third down, if I'm not mistaken, like 3rd and 20, 3rd and 18. And so, he's clearly, as you said, got a lot left in the tank. And this is a guy that you want to roster, especially if you are a Saquon Barkley owner and are a little bit concerned about the injury. Saquon's come up a little tight the past couple of games, and so maybe a slight concern there in terms of just his overall health. But if the Eagles start to push back in the direction of running the football, we've seen this offense be a little more volatile as they try to figure out their identity this season. Tank Bigsby is going to be a smart pickup.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next guys, as we move into our tight ends too, is I don't know if he's necessarily on anybody's watch list at this point, but he is on ours too, just because of the aforementioned injuries with Drake London. And that's Kyle Pitts for the Atlanta Falcons, man. 9 receptions on 9 targets, again, an accurate and efficient day for him. Only 59 yards, but I mean, in those full PPR leagues, as you mentioned, kind of that PPR merchant role. Darnell Mooney showed he wasn't willing to be that guy this week. Bijan kind of had a quiet game for his standards. So who else does that leave with Drake London being hurt? The former first-round pick and one of the best young tight ends still in this league. And that's Kyle Pitts, man. Finished the day with 14.9 fantasy points. I think the real question for him is he didn't look good last year with Kirk Cousins. So if Kirk Cousins is consistently getting minutes and getting a lot of these snaps, does that put Pitts kind of back into the shadows? Because it looked like him and Penix had developed a lot of good chemistry this year. And I think that's the situation I want to monitor most with Pitts.
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be interesting. As you mentioned, the QB situation is going to be a big part here in terms of, is it Penix, is it Kirk Cousins moving forward? Kirk Cousins could also be shopped ahead of the trade deadline, depending on the health of Michael Penix. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But anytime a tight end can go out and get 9 receptions in a game, that's gold for you, because tight ends are not kind of a premium position outside of maybe the top 2-3 guys. And we've mentioned some of those guys like Trey McBride and George Kittle in prior podcasts. But this is a pretty good showing for a guy in Kyle Pitts that many of us kind of write off year after year of like, oh, this guy's not going to do anything. I think the reason, as you aptly mentioned, Charlie, why he's on the watch list is just monitoring the QB situation, but also monitoring just the opportunity share in this offense. Does Drake London come back and reclaim his wide receiver 1 role? No doubt he'll do that if he stays healthy. But that'll be something to keep an eye on. And then does Kyle Pitts step up as that second pass catching option? We know Bijan will get his in the passing game, but will Kyle Pitts step up as that predominant pass catching option? That remains to be seen. So just keep him on your watch list for right now.
Yeah, and our final player on the watch list, another tight end, and that's Harold Fannin from the Cleveland Browns. We've actually talked about him earlier on in the season in one of our first podcasts, and that was he's a young rookie young rookie tight end, and still had a really really good game this weekend, even though it was a complete blowout and utter no show from the rest of the team outside of Myles Garrett. And Fannin finished with 6 receptions on 8 targets, along 62 yards, and had a reception touchdown with that, and also even got into the rushing attack, albeit for only 2 yards. But it shows the flexibility and the versatility of his game. And those 18 points, man, to be in a complete blowout situation like that. The QB room is an absolute mess. Dylan Gabriel doesn't look ready. They got rid of, obviously, Joe Flacco. We've talked about him multiple times being on the Bengals now. Deshaun Watson, I don't even want to get into where he's at or what's going on with him. And if Gabriel's not ready, where does that leave Shador? But to be able to still produce like this at a high standard in a team, in a game where it's supposed to be David Njoku's offense, I mean, I really like that. And as a rookie, dude, this guy's definitely worth monitoring. And if you can stash him and, look at his matchups and you like the matchups dependent, then and go out and get him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing here is he's sharing opportunities with David Njoku in that offense. Clearly, Kevin Stefanski, and we've mentioned this in prior podcasts, but clearly Kevin Stefanski wants to draw up opportunities for him. This is a young player. This is a talented player. And again, saw 8 opportunities this game, had a touchdown, albeit a tough matchup. Patriots have been very good on the defensive side of the ball. But anytime a guy can go out and get close to 20 points and is sharing opportunities with another guy, definitely a guy that you want to keep your eye on. I don't know that I would go out and sell the farm to try and get this guy at this point when you have better options like Aronde Gadsden, even Jake Ferguson, that are in better passing offenses than the Browns. But definitely a guy you want to keep your eye on. The main thing here to watch will also be what does he look like week to week with David Njoku, because Njoku has also had some spike weeks. And so they do tend to share opportunity, but if he shows some consistency these next few games, he could be a good pickup for your late season run.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, to be able to, like we said, produce in that kind of system with a lack of QB effectiveness shows a lot and bodes well for him. But for that, we're going to finish all of our watch list and we're going to move into our last and final segment. And that's the next week's game where we go into. And last week we talked about the, Packers and Steelers that we let off. And that was my team. And this week we're going to talk about Kaushik's team, Denver Broncos, taking on the Houston Texans, man. And big game for them. They're coming off a heater right now. They've won the last 5. However, there has been some injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Defensive Player of the Year, reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Patrick Surtain, isn't going to be available, so it's going to thrust their CB2 Riley Moss into the situation. And on the other side, the Texans, who started out really, really cold, have kind of trended up, coming off a big win versus the 49ers. And how are you feeling about this?
Yeah, no, I think, the Broncos should come into this game feeling confident. They're coming off a big blowout at home against the Cowboys. Cowboys have been one of the best offenses in football. The Pat Surtain injury, I think he's got a pectoral injury. He's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks. So that's definitely a big loss on the defensive side of the ball. But they're not going up against the most talented wide receiver core this week, even with Nico Collins in the lineup. As we mentioned, many of these guys are younger playmakers in Houston. So I'm not too concerned with not having Pat Surtain for this game. But regardless, it feels like this could be a bit of a letdown game, maybe a trap game for the Broncos going on the road against a Texans team that nobody really expects to win this game, especially given how good the Broncos have looked. But I'm looking to see how well Bo Nix fares in this game. Can he come out? Can he take command of this offense? We saw that they got out to a lead in Indy and looked so amazing for the first part of that game, but couldn't close. And so that's the thing I'm going to be looking for from the Broncos. Can they close this game? We saw that the 49ers had a tough game this week against the Texans in that same building. Christian McCaffrey had a dud, and just Mac Jones didn't look very comfortable. And so when it comes to Bo Nix, can they get that short passing game going early? We know the Texans can be tough with Will Anderson, Derek Stingley, and others, Daniil Hunter as well on that side of the ball. And so it's going to be a tough defense. DeMeco Ryans likes to get after the passer. And so we'll see how Bo Nix does. From CJ Stroud's perspective, just want to see if he can keep consistent. It seems like the Texans haven't really put 2 complete games together at any point this season. they tend to spike in some weeks and then really slow down in others. And so looking for consistency from that side. Hopefully they get Nico Collins back in this game and can get him going a little bit against the secondary. But I'm expecting the Broncos to hopefully weather the storm here and come out on top in what could be a tighter affair than most of us expect.
Yeah, I definitely think it will go down to the wire. Texans haven't gotten blown out really in any of their games this year, even when the offense hasn't been producing. So the Broncos are going to have to bring their A game, and like you said, don't fall into the trap. And the next week, or in the next game we're going to talk about is probably the most anticipated matchup of the entire weekend, as it features two Super Bowl favorite teams, both in the AFC, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs at the Buffalo Bills. It's kind of the game that everybody's had circled on their schedule since week one of the season. And it's huge implications, man. Can the Bills exercise their demons and reestablish themselves as the favorite in the AFC? They're currently one game back of the Patriots in the AFC East, who I think have kind of been the surprise team outside of the Indianapolis Colts. But this is your time to beat them. The Chiefs, they just came off a 28-7 win tonight, actually, as we record this, versus the Commanders. However, they were playing their backup QB. They haven't looked incredibly, great. Last year, even when they won 15 games, they didn't look like a super dominant team like they had the year prior. However, they're going to get up for this team. Steve Spagnuolo is going to game plan tremendously. It's just up to Buffalo. Where does the receiving core look like? We talked about Khalil Shakir. Is he going to come through? Is Keon Coleman going to have a big game? And can James Cook, dude, if they can establish the run against a stout run defense of the Chiefs, that's going to do wonders for Josh Allen, as well as stretching the field and allowing it to open up for his wide receivers.
Yeah, this is a premium matchup. It feels like the Chiefs and Bills, whenever they get together, it's always a down to the wire, pulling on your heartstrings kind of matchup. And I think given the situation that both these teams are in a tight playoff race, this will be a very, very interesting matchup for all of us, probably the game of the week this week. So yeah, as you mentioned, Charlie, huge playoff implications. Josh Allen and the Bills coming off a very awesome win against the Panthers in Carolina, where they were able to do whatever they wanted to do. Josh Allen had 2 rushing touchdowns, James Cook with 2 rushing touchdowns, got some passing game involvement to Khalil Shakir. So nice to see them get going. As we mentioned, the Chiefs, as we filmed this, just beat the Commanders. But Patrick Mahomes early in that game looked a little bit rattled with that zone defense. Bobby Wagner, a couple of tip balls. Travis Kelce, ball hits him a couple of times in the hands. Had an interception off of one of those deflections. So still trying to figure things out. I know they got Rashee Rice back, and that's been a big boost for them. And they found their goal line guy in Kareem Hunt. But yeah, just given that, the Chiefs look a little bit more vulnerable than usual, can the Bills put their foot down and really get ahead in this playoff race? That's going to be a big question that hopefully gets answered here. But yeah, hopefully it should be a good game. I think it'll be a close one as well. The Bills have been a bit more generous on the defensive side of the ball, so I think that'll even out some of the deficiencies that we see with this Chiefs offense. So it should be one for the ages as usual.
Yeah, as a Broncos fan, you definitely are going to be cheering for Buffalo in this matchup. You want the ability to get an extra game ahead on the Chiefs. And even as a Packers fan, I'd like to see Buffalo kind of pull through and exercise, as I mentioned, those demons. And the next matchup is, featuring the other AFC contender outside of the Colts, as like I mentioned, the biggest surprise in the entire NFL, and that's the Atlanta Falcons at the New England Patriots. Patriots being the surprise, and kind of battle of the two teams with the different trajectories. Falcons kind of having a huge letdown loss right now against the Bills, and then they haven't played to their standards these last 2 weeks. Didn't look great versus San Francisco on a banged up defensive corpse, and then this last week can get absolutely boat raced versus the Dolphins, and it's like, where were they offensively? The Penix question marks. Dolphins looked like the second worst team in the NFL behind the Jets this entire year. Their offense didn't look great. They haven't scored a lot of points up to this time. And are they going to be able to pick themselves up the mat? Patriots look like the hottest team in the NFL outside of Indianapolis right now, and outside of maybe the Green Bay Packers. So it's like, where do you sit? And I should say the Broncos, who have also won 5 straight. So it's like, where do you sit if you're the Falcons? This is a make or break game. You lose this game, you're probably out of the AFC South race, because it's going to be the Bucs to lose. You win this game, you stay in the race with them, you give yourself an opportunity to potentially sneak into the wild card, even if you don't win the division, and you establish it yourself that, hey, we are one of the best teams in the NFL when we're truly locked in and we're playing our peak football, which is all that matters when you get into December and January. On the flip side of that, Patriots, can they continue to ride high? Drake May, as I mentioned, leading the NFL in completion percentage right now. We talked about Kayshon Boutte. We talked about Stephon Diggs. We talked about Ramondre Stevenson. Um, the offense looks to be clicking. We know how good their defense is, as is most defenses under head coach Mike Vrabel. It's just really who's going to be more desperate, who's going to want it, and who's going to set the tone and throw that first punch, and then whether or not the other team can withstand that.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting game, and I think it could be a trap game for the Patriots. They played at home against the Browns, and Myles Garrett was able to get after the passer. The Falcons aren't an amazing team defensively. We saw that against the Dolphins this week, but they have gotten after the Vikings in the past. I think they had 21 fantasy points as a defense that week. And I could see this maybe being a bit of a letdown game for Drake May, given, the Patriots have looked so good, especially at home. They've dominated teams. They've boat raced teams. He's throwing the ball so well. But the Falcons are coming in with that X factor of they have something to prove, as you mentioned, Charlie, in this NFC South race. This is a game that they must have coming off of two emotional games against the same division. They beat the Bills at home. They lost to the Dolphins at home the next week. And now they get another AFC East opponent in the Patriots. And so they would have definitely studied some film. They played two teams that have played against this team in the past. And so I expect the Falcons to come out charging. Hopefully they can get Drake London back, get Bijan Robinson established early in the running game. This is a tough defense in New England, and they're definitely going to come and play well. But I think the big questions here are, who's playing quarterback for the Falcons? And can this New England running game get back on track? I think as good as Drake May has looked, he's still a young quarterback. And especially given the Falcons need this game, the running game is going to be critical. So Ramondre Stevenson as well as Travion Henderson will need to step up big so that they can open up those big plays down the field. Should be a fun one.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. And just like you said, to see what Travion Henderson, if he can continue to get reps and finally break through in the NFL, because I think a lot of people were expecting him to be in that top 2 or 3 running back conversation. He just hasn't got the opportunities to do that yet. And our final matchup of the weeks to look forward to is your hometown team at the moment right now versus your boys of Cincinnati and Ja'Marr Chase, and that's Chicago Bears at the Cincinnati Bengals. Very desperate teams, kind of both coming off crucial, devastating losses. I think the Bengals more so than even the Bears. Bears, I think, was more of just a huge letdown. I thought with a team that's been so good at turning other teams over this year. They're playing a backup QB versus the Ravens. Thought they should have had that one. They ended up losing that game by 14. However, I will say to Baltimore's standpoint is that was a kitchen sink game. You just throw everything you have at them. If Baltimore loses that game, there's no way they're not aiming for a top 3 or 4 pick in the NFL draft. That was their let's cry out, let's do what we can to get a dub. And the Bengals, man, like we talked about earlier with the Ja'Marr Chase in that segment, is just getting that win versus the Jets would have set themselves to be in a position to be a game back from the Steelers, who ended up losing later on and lost last night to the Packers. So they still have an opportunity. I don't see them making the wild card, which is how good the Bills have been, the Patriots, and the Chargers and Broncos. So right there is just 4 teams that are probably guaranteed a playoff spot, not including the Chiefs, not including the Colts, and then whoever wins the North. So very limited. It's just be interesting to see how Caleb Williams looks versus a porous defense, and can the Bears defense turn over the Bengals, who haven't really been doing that since Joe Flacco came in, and can anybody even attempt to limit Ja'Marr Chase right now?
Yeah, no, this will be a fun game. Both teams are desperate. This is the Midwest battle. I think both teams need this game for various reasons. They've got some key divisional races going on. Bears trying to fight for a playoff spot in the NFC, trying to fend off the Packers and the Lions for that division crown. And then the Bengals, a tough loss at home to the Jets this week. And they need this game, right? The Bengals, it feels like they need to win out at this point, or at least go on a streak. given how good Jamar Chase has been playing. Joe Flacco has been amazing as well, and we talked about Chase Brown already. So their offensive pieces are clicking. I think their defense really needs to step up. And so, yeah, I think the Bengals defense, hopefully they, come and try and get after this early with Caleb Williams. We saw that he was a bit vulnerable this week. Had that interception to Nate Wiggins, and then Derrick Henry punches in that touchdown. That was a key moment in the game, and just didn't look as functional or as acclimated in the system this past week against the Ravens. And so, does that continue into this game, or can he flip the script, flip the switch from the last game, and move on, continue to feed guys like Rome Odunze down the field, DJ Moore, continue to get DeAndre Swift involved in the rushing game? We saw how good Breece Hall played against this Bengals team in the same building last week. So I think DeAndre Swift will continue finding success, and that should help a guy like a Caleb Williams who's coming off a game where he struggled, and hopefully open up the play action game for those tight ends, for DJ Moore, for Rome Odunze, and maybe even Luther Burden to get one of those deep balls down the field. From the Bengals perspective, we talked about Jamar Chase, Charlie. That's my guy. That's my boy. That's one of my favorite players in the league, if not my favorite. I think he's going to see a ton of targets in this game. They're going to need him, and hopefully Chase Brown can keep it going. The Bears have been pretty generous on the ground and through the air as a team. I do think they have the slightly better defense in this game, and so that will be an X factor for me. But I think the Bengals should do enough to keep this close, given that they are a desperate team and given that they have a good quarterback who's playing at a very high level right now. So this game could again come down to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for all the matchups. It'll just be interesting to see where Chicago kind of ends up and where their headspace at. And if Caleb Williams doesn't, I know he's been good enough to win them a lot of games this year, but if he doesn't come through in this week in what should probably a must-win game for them, like you said, to stay competitive in their division, does that open up the room for Tyson Bagent? So I think there's some underlying questions that I'm really, really excited for. And then with the Bengals, does this, like, if they lose this game, where does that leave them with Joe Burrow? Is it something where they just say, hey, we're going to have you sit for the remainder of the season, you're going to fully rest up? And then what does that do with the rest of the team? But for that, we're all finished up here. And again, as always, man, I'm glad we make time for each other and we have the ability to do this. And it's, as always, it's a ton of fun, man. And I'm thankful for the opportunity, because it's great that we're both doing something we're passionate about. And, until next time, brother. So you have any last words for the viewers?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Charlie. I always echo the sentiments. It's always fun doing this with you, man. I'm glad we make time for this. Thankful to our viewers as well. Thankful for everybody that's following on Spotify and YouTube. It's been a lot of fun talking about this. We put a ton of time into the content and just coming up with players each week. And so it's always fun to get our unique takes on these players. And, we're really appreciative for such a great follower base. And Charlie, I'm really grateful for you for being my partner in crime here. Until next time, my man.